The order, we start with questions for the Secretary of State for Works and Pensions. Will Stone.
Question number 1, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, there should be no benefit decisions without explanation. Claim decisions should always be set out with the reasons. If a decision is unclear or the reasons are unclear, a further detailed verbal or written explanation can be requested and will be provided.
Will Stone.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for his response. Could he please outline to me how this government will support young disabled people in having a positive engagement with the benefit system and alongside work? Thank you.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend, and he's absolutely right to press for improvements. But we do want to change the way job centres are thought about, the way the benefit system is thought about. Our youth work coaches talk a lot to disabled young people, and they're very keen to be able to help more. Our reforms are making that possible, giving better help and support and opening up new opportunities for disabled young people up and down the country.
Jim Shannon.
Mr. Speaker, Minister, my staff member does benefit applications and appeals and tribunals at least 5 days a week. Along with myself, she's the person who overturns 75% of all those applications in favour of the applicant. It tells me, Mr. Speaker, there's something wrong with the system. I have to say and put it on record, I am really, really worried sick for my constituents who suffer from mental issues because of our conflict of 30 years, but also physical issues as well. And Minister, there must be a system that protects those people, protects my constituents, protects the people that I represent in this House and the people that we all represent.
Minister.
Well, I think the honourable gentleman, again, is right to call for improvements. We do want to see improvements in assessments. I think he's probably well aware that we will shortly be publishing a green paper with proposals for reform to the health and disability benefit system, and we will have something to say about that in the course of that document.
Under Martin.
Question number 2.
Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, before I answer, I want to say there has understandably been lots of speculation about the government's reforms to social security, and I want to assure the House, and most importantly the public, that we'll be coming forward with our proposals imminently to ensure there is trust and fairness in the social security system, and to ensure that it is there for people who need it now and for years to come. With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to answer questions 2, 5, 11 and 21 together. Almost 1 million young people are not in education, employment or training. That is terrible for their living standards, future job prospects and for their health. That is why our new Youth Guarantee will ensure every young person is earning or learning. Our trailblazers, backed by £45 million of additional funding, will lead the way and will start in 8 areas next month.
Under Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much. All of those 1 million people are a real person, and I was contacted by a young man in my constituency who studied an early years education T-level and wanted to enter a desperately understaffed profession but has been struggling ever since to access that starter job. Being out of work, being young, can have a scarring effect that impacts people's jobs and prospects for a lifetime. So can the Secretary of State, working to identify people at risk of being NEET, ensure my constituents that working with him to support finding meaningful work?
State.
I thank my honourable friend for her question. Her constituent deserves to fulfil his potential and live his hopes and dreams like everybody else. And we will be working hard with the Department for Education to identify those young people who are at risk of being NEET, to make sure we put in place the skills and training they need to get the jobs of the future and fulfil their potential as they deserve.
Emma Food.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I suspect there might be quite a spike in the number of Geordies not in work today, given the cup final at the weekend. But recently I visited Azure, a charity in my constituency, providing learning and work opportunities, especially for young people with learning disabilities. And I heard from them about the incredible work that they do in providing young people with hands-on experience in a hospitality-based, work-based learning environment. Can the Secretary of State detail more about what government can do to support charities like Azure to provide these vital opportunities?
I really want to congratulate Azure for the brilliant work that they do, and I believe that charities and voluntary organisations have an essential role in getting people on the pathway to work and success. I know from my own constituency, with the supported internship programmes that have been run, including through my local hospital, that young people with learning difficulties with the right support can get those jobs, get that work, and that's what this government wants to deliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm increasingly concerned by the rising number of young people in Milton Keynes who are out of work due to mental health issues. And I think this is a key factor behind the nearly 12% increase in young people claiming unemployment benefits in Milton Keynes since 2024. Can the Secretary of State outline what steps the government is taking to ensure these young people have the support and opportunities they need to continue to improve their health, secure stable employment and live independently with better living standards?
Secretary of State.
I really share my honourable friend's concern about the number of young people not in work due to mental health conditions. That has increased by over 25% in the last year alone, and now stands at 270,000 young people who are economically inactive due to poor mental health. That is why we are focusing on early intervention, providing mental health support in every school, recruiting an extra 8,500 more mental health staff, but also why this is such an important part of our youth guarantee and the trailblazers that we will be launching from April to make sure every young person is earning or learning.
Babisha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Children and young people are the future of Derby, and the Derby Promise recognises this. It's bringing together businesses and organisations from across our great city to give children meaningful, aspirational experiences, whether that's at iconic factories, cultural or sports venues. But we know that children already face limits on their future career aspirations by the age of 7. Can the Minister outline what work her department is taking to support children in Derby and across the UK from an early age to raise their aspirations when it comes to a future career? And will she agree to visit Derby to see the Derby Promise in action?
State.
I or one of my team will definitely visit Derby Promise, and I really share his concerns that young people are ruling out future careers at a young age. I met with the Careers and Enterprise Company on Friday, and they told me children are ruling out careers by their gender at age 7 and by their class by age 9. And for this party, that is not good enough. I hope that Derby Promise will be involved in the youth guarantee in the East Midlands, led by the Mayor there, Claire Ward, because we have to unlock the potential of every young person if they and this country is going to succeed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like young people in Portsmouth North, Cramlington and at Killingworth and Derby South, young people in Glastonbury and Somerton face barriers to their employment, education and training due to poor public transport infrastructure. However, research has shown that a 1% improvement in public transport times could support a 1% reduction in employment deprivation. So what steps is the Minister taking alongside Cabinet colleagues to remove barriers to employment, education and training in rural areas?
Right.
The Honourable Lady makes a really important point, and it's one that mayors and local leaders raise with us regularly, and actually families who are struggling, children, young people in poverty. That is why we believe that putting mayors and local leaders in the driving seat of change so they can link up transport, skills, job opportunities as part of our plans is so important, and myself and my honourable friend, the Minister for Employment, have been working closely with local leaders to make sure that happens, because if you've got to get work, the transport's got to be in place.
Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister for Employment and Disabilities was kind enough to come to the launch of the What Comes After Education report by the National Star and the Together Trust. One of the key findings of that report is that young people with disabilities face particular problems when trying to access work. The system is set up against them, workplaces are set up not to work for them, and all they want to do, many of them, is just do what they can to find meaningful employment. So when ministers are making decisions about upcoming welfare changes, I hope that report will be on their desk and it will be properly considered.
Secretary of State.
Absolutely, and the Honourable Gentleman will indeed be hearing more about our plans, which will include proper employment support to help people on a pathway to success. We have our Keep Britain Working review led by the former boss of John Lewis, Charlie Mayfield, which is looking at precisely this issue. What more can employers do with the support from government to create healthier, more inclusive workplaces and help do more to guarantee that disabled people who can work have the same rights and choices to work as everybody else.
Jess Brownfellow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Much like the constituencies mentioned, my young people in Chichester are struggling to find work, and that's no more apparent than in those with learning difficulties. So will the Secretary of State join me in congratulating Together Our Community, shortened to TOC, that are providing work experience for young people with learning disabilities from 18 to 35? To show that they do have something to offer the workforce. TOC are about to open their own cafe and centre for these young people. And so will the Secretary of State outline what support is available for charities like this and join me at their opening next month?
Secretary of State.
I will indeed congratulate TOC. That sounds, they sound like they're doing fantastic work, and on Friday I was talking to the head teacher of a special needs school near my constituency, who was talking about we have to absolutely make sure work experience, careers advice, working with voluntary groups are all part of the package of support that we put in place. And I will certainly, if possible, try myself or one of my colleagues come and see the work they're doing, because charities and voluntary groups are absolutely critical to this government's plans.
We now come to Secretary of State Helen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in the autumn, the Right Honourable Lady said, "We will not allow young people not to be in education, employment or training." How is it possible then that since Labour have been in office, there are 100,000 more young people in exactly that situation?
Secretary of State.
She had 14 years to solve this problem, and their record is clear. Nearly 1 million young people not in education, employment or training, 1 in 8 of all of our young people. Young people with mental health concerns out of work now reach 270,000. That is the legacy of 14 years of the Conservative government, and it's a legacy this government is determined to change.
Helen Wakely.
Mr. Speaker, I said since the party opposite have been in government, the answer is because of her Chancellor, her tax on jobs, her economic mismanagement. Those decisions are costing young people opportunities. Instead of taxing jobs, they should have been ready with a plan for welfare reform back at the time of the budget. They had spent 9 months trying to cobble one together, Mr. Speaker, and still we wait. Why did the Right Honourable Lady not make any plans in opposition, and does she regret that?
The Secretary of State.
Members opposite had no plan. Even their own former Chancellor admitted the numbers were made up. The only thing that they did put forward, proposals on the work capability assessment, have recently been ruled illegal by the courts. No plan, but a clear record, leaving people behind, writing them off and putting them on the scrap heap. But this Labour government will turn that round, get people on a pathway to success and get our country on the pathway to success too.
Joshua Reynolds.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The two-child benefit cap was introduced by the Conservative Party 10 years ago. Their period in office saw child poverty rise to over 4 million and 1 in 3 of our children arriving at primary school not ready to learn. As soon as the Secretary of State and I were appointed, we got to work to establish our child poverty task force, as was promised in Labour's manifesto, and those efforts are ongoing.
Joshua Reynolds.
Mr. Speaker. A study by the British Medical Journal found that people in food poverty have diets with worse health outcomes, including more fat, sugar and salt. So what conversations has the Minister had with the Health Secretary about how lifting the two-child benefit cap could improve diets and reduce costs for the NHS?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Health Secretary and I have talked about child poverty many times as we sat on those benches watching the situation for our kids get worse and worse every year. But the member makes a very serious and important point about the wide-ranging consequences of poverty. And if I may, I would encourage him to perhaps submit the evidence he mentioned to the Child Poverty Task Force so that we can take full account of it.
Dave Beckeller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, 1 in 2 children in my constituency of Hackney South and Shoreditch live in poverty. And there's a lot of speculation swirling around the excellent Child Poverty Task Force, which I applaud the government for establishing. One of those is that the cap could be lifted for under 5s, which would affect fewer than 20,000 households, compared with the 440,000 households which currently are affected by the 2-child benefit cap. Can the Minister reassure the House and the country that the Child Poverty Task Force is looking to support all children in poverty, whatever decisions it comes up with, and not just a small segment of them?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I can. All children matter, and we're taking account of a considerable range of different policy options, working carefully through the impact that they will have. But, Mr. Speaker, all of the children in this country matter.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 4.
Deirdre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I meet regularly with Department for Business and Trade ministers, and we are committed to working with businesses to ensure policy is pro-employer and pro-worker. Boosting wages will increase workforce participation, helping employers fill vacancies and supporting us to reach an 80% employment ambition.
Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With many members on that side of the House claiming that they care about young people being employed, has her department made assessments on the employment impact of the decision to introduce minimum guaranteed hours for students and young people who rely on the flexibility of being able to pick and choose their work hours, particularly those who are working in the hospitality sector, a sector which is being decimated by this government?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable gentleman is referring to the ban on exploitative zero-hours contracts. But if somebody wants a flexible hours contract, then that's a good thing. And there is nothing in the changes that will prevent that. In fact, what I found being in DWP is that employers have had not sufficient contact from job centres, and only 1 in 6 think about using them. So in terms of getting young people a proper range of choices and jobs through the job centre, not nearly enough work had been done to serve employers better. And that's what a real growth agenda looks like from DWP.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and Lá Féile Pádraig Conaghuiv. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you and to all of your team. The disability employment gap stands at 30%, and countless disabled workers end up out of work because their employers refuse to make simple changes that would help them do their jobs. Does the Minister agree that the default right to flexible working in Labour's Employment Rights Bill will help many disabled workers to keep jobs they love? And what else can her department do to help more disabled people to find and keep work?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and may I say how great it is to hear the beautiful language of Irish spoken in this chamber. With regards to flexibility, I do think with the increase in conditions that can be very variable over time, that flexible working right will help people. And the Minister for Disabled People and I are working very closely with disabled people's organisations and charities and others to think about how we can build those pathways into work as we change job centres and improve employment support, making sure that raising the disability employment rate is at the heart of those changes.
Jonathan Brash.
Number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'll answer questions 6 and 15 together. We will be reforming the current broken system of health and disability benefits. We'll bring forward very soon a green paper with a proper plan setting out how we will help disabled people who can work to do so while fully supporting the most severely disabled as well.
Jonathan Brash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Work is good for us. It is good for our physical health, our mental health and our general well-being. And where someone can work, it is essential that they are given all the support to do so. That said, it is also imperative that those who are sick, vulnerable or disabled are always protected. Does he agree with me that striking this balance between supporting those who can work and protecting those who can't must be central to any welfare reform?
Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and that balance will be at the heart of the Green Paper that we're bringing forward. We will deliver proper employment support for disabled people, which has been taken away since 2010. We will deal with the incentives to inactivity, which the current system presents. But there will, of course, always be people unable to work through disability or ill health, and we are absolutely committed to fully supporting them too.
Ms. Jarvis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Eastleigh who support and help care for disabled family members are desperately concerned about any potential cuts to benefits, including personal independence payments. They include Laura, whose son is registered blind, and Debbie, who helps care for her disabled daughter and is herself disabled. Can the Minister reassure my constituents that disability benefits for people who are unable to work will not be cut?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I am concerned about the level of anxiety there has been around over recent weeks and speculation, and I'm sad that that's happened and that people have been concerned. But what I would say to her is that the current welfare system is failing the very people it is supposed to help, the people it's there for. And our aim is to make the system sustainable so that it'll be there for people now and in the future. And I think when she sees the proposals, she'll see how we're going to deliver on that commitment.
To the Select Committee, Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Can my right honourable friend confirm that there will be an analysis alongside the Green Paper on the impacts that it will have on poverty, employment and on health?
Minister.
I can confirm to my honourable friend that we will be producing a full impact assessment in due course.
Esther McVeigh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was a minister in the Department of Work and Pensions, working with my right honourable friend for Chingford and Woodford Green in reducing welfare dependency and getting 1,000 more people into work each and every day and delivering record numbers of people into work, the Labour Party opposed us every step of the way. So can I take it that the recent conversion to reducing the benefit bill from the government is only about conning the OBR into thinking they will balance the books after their disastrous budget rather than because they really believe in it?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I remember extremely well when the Right Honourable Lady was a minister in the department. It was very striking how the disability employment gap, which had been falling up till 2010, suddenly stopped falling and plateaued from that moment on. We are going to be delivering, Mr. Speaker, a decisive shift to early intervention, helping people to stay in work, to renew fairness, to renew trust in the system, and we'll be providing personalised support so that those who can work can get the jobs that they want.
Lincoln Jack.
Question number 7, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The introduction of universal credit and the policy choices of the last Conservative government do seem to have had some effect on people's propensity to be in work. And in January, the Department for Work and Pensions published data showing that of the increase in incapacity benefits caseload since the 2018 universal credit rollout, 30% of the rise in claims could be explained by foreseeable demographic change and the effect of the structural alterations to the benefit, which leaves 70% of the increase that we do not have data to explain. But the OBR and others have drawn attention to the structure of social security and the changes over the past decade. On publishing the analysis I mentioned just now, I told this House that the previous Conservative government took decisions on social security that segregated people away from work and forgot about them, and I stand by those comments.
Lincoln Jott.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Spelthorne are very hard-working and they don't mind their taxes being paid for a safety net for the most vulnerable in our society. But they really do get annoyed when they see their taxes going to people who are scamming the benefit system. What assessment has any of the front bench made of these so-called sickfluencer sites, social media platforms where people are shown how to game the benefits system? Have any of them looked at them, and are they a good or a bad thing?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. He will know that we have a fraud bill going through the House at the moment, and the issue that he has raised is at the forefront of the attention of my fellow minister, the Minister for Transformation, and he will take every step that he can to deal with issues in that area.
Chris Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Friday, I visited Stansted Airport, a huge employer for my constituency of Harlow, and found out about the important work they're doing, working with the DWP and the Job Centre to get long-term unemployed people back into work. Can I ask the Minister what work her department are doing to work with people like Stansted Airport to see good practice like Stansted and working minds in my constituency?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And could I, through my honourable friend, give my thanks to everybody in Harlow Job Centre, because it sounds like they've got their shoulder to the wheel, getting job opportunities for people who need them. When we arrived in the department, we uncovered that there was not nearly a good enough relationship between the department and employers. That's why we put a new strategy in place, doing the basics well with a single point of contact and making sure that we've got on-the-job training that's tailored to specific employers. So we'll be doing more to change in that area, but thank you to everyone in Harlow for the efforts that they're making.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Dowling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And there continues, Mr. Speaker, to be unacceptable delays in processing access to work applications, both for my constituents in Torbay and across the country. This leads to fears amongst those disabled people that these job offers will be withdrawn by their would-be employers. What reassurance can the Minister give the Chamber that they have plans afoot to tackle this backlog?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member makes a very important point, and we had a manifesto commitment in place to try to tackle the backlog. We've put more staff in place to deal with that, but we've got more to do because it is important that disabled people are able to take up jobs that are offered to them, and we need to make sure that that is a scheme that works.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question 8, please.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government has been running the biggest ever pension credit take-up campaign, and in the latest stage we're now writing to all pensioners who make a new housing benefit claim and appear to be entitled to pension credit, directly targeting them and encouraging them to apply.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rate of take-up for pension credit has traditionally been between 60 and 65%, which, if that was uplifted, could take 400,000 people out of income poverty. And in Dorset, around 20% increase in the number of over 65s over the last decade. But the biggest concern they're saying is about the paperwork they have to complete. The applications are up to 225 questions purely for pension credit, and so many could very easily be able to claim for things like carers addition through a slight tweak in the paperwork. So what is the department doing to simplify and combine the applications to make life easier for pensioners?
Minister.
Thank you. We are already doing a lot to simplify the process. It now takes 60 minutes on average to complete an online form, and 90% of people apply online or over the phone. But she's completely right to highlight that we must do more, including simplifying the form. We continue to keep that under review, and I'd always be interested in ideas to go further.
Come to Shadow Minister Stanley Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When they scrapped the universal entitlement to the winter fuel payment, they said that all 880,000 people eligible for it would get it through pension credit. We now know that didn't happen. They've got less than 120,000 new pensioners enrolled. More than 750,000 of the poorest pensioners missing out on a vital support this winter. So will the Minister tell us, was that the plan all along, to save money at the expense of the poorest pensioners, or will he admit that he has completely failed in his duty towards the most poor elderly people in our society?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I mean, the lesson I've learned is from the last government that put up pension and poverty year after year after year by 300,000 over the course of the last government. And what this government has done is run a pension credit take-up campaign that has seen an 81% increase in applications since July compared to the period last year, and 46,000 more awards compared to that period. That is what a government doing its job looks like.
Danny Kruger.
There are 45,000 more awards than the same period last year. We're talking about 880,000 people who are eligible. It's a pathetic achievement, and they've spent millions of pounds advertising this. And we've still got thousands of people waiting for their winter fuel payment, and the winter is over, so it's a little late for their next advertising plan. The fact is we still don't know who has missed out, what the waiting time for them was, what the effect has been on pension and poverty, what the effect has been on hospital admissions, which have increased significantly for pensioners. Given the scandalous failure of the pension credit campaign, will the government release all available data on the impact of the winter fuel payment cut?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've already released significant data on that, and as I say, just weeks ago, data showing the unparalleled success of the campaign to drive up pension credit take-up in recent days. And what we're doing now is concentrating on increasing support for pensioners right across the board, because the biggest disgrace from the last government was where they left this health service that our older generations rely on, and we are turning that around day after day.
Andrew Lewin.
Question number 9, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Supporting everyone to find good, meaningful work and helping them to progress is vital for economic growth. This includes disabled people who want to work and contribute, but who are let down by the current system. Job centres have a key role to play in this, and through creating a new Jobs and Careers Service, we will help more people get into work and on at work, supporting our ambition for an 80% employment rate.
Andrew Luke.
Very grateful to the Minister for his answer. I'm fortunate in my community that we have an above-average number of 18 to 24-year-olds, but when I was talking to the manager of the Hatfield Job Centre just last week, they said to me that the single biggest barrier for young people to get into work was their mental health, as a number of colleagues have spoken about in the chamber today. Could the Minister say a little bit more about our objective for helping young people into work? And does he agree with me that the only way we're going to succeed in growing the economy is by helping those people overcome those barriers to their mental health?
Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely correct to highlight the importance of tackling economic inactivity in order to drive up economic growth. This government understands the negative effects that unemployment can have on mental health, particularly amongst young people, which can impact future prospects. The Youth Guarantee will help address barriers faced by young people to ensure that they can access quality training opportunities, an apprenticeship or help to find work, boosting their confidence to give them the very best chance of success in the workplace.
John Glenn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A few weeks ago, I visited Salisbury Job Centre and I met with Kirsty Reeks and George Thornley, who were helping me organise a jobs fair on Thursday, the 8th of May. They couldn't have been more helpful. Their encyclopedic knowledge of the local jobs market and businesses was so impressive. Would the Minister congratulate them and thank them for the help that they're giving me for the jobs fair in Salisbury Guildhall on the 8th of May? But would he also reflect on what incentives job centres could have to actually reach out to businesses and deepen their knowledge of local labour markets?
Minister.
Can I thank the honourable gentleman for his question? He's absolutely correct to raise the issue of job centres reaching out to local employers. We know that we have a significant issue with the job centre being the vehicle of choice to advertise local job opportunities. This is a long-standing issue and something that we are keen to address. And of course, I am delighted to congratulate his local job centre on the work that they are doing to promote the jobs fair.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Question number 10.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Official unemployment currently sits at 4.4%, which is clearly much lower than the historic high, which was 11.9% in June 1984. However, today's official unemployment level masks the legacy of the recent Conservatives period in office, which saw numbers of people off sick rise to nearly 3 million, concentrated in places with employment rates well below the national average, creating a vicious circle where people are forced to leave the place they love for a chance of a career, and those who are left do worse and worse, which is why, as part of our Get Britain Working reforms, we're building a new Jobs and Careers Service that will be locally tailored and that will help everyone find access to support to get a good, meaningful job and help people progress in work.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. Compared to this time last year, almost 500 more people are on the claimant count in Basildon and Billericay. Almost 100 more of those are under 25. How many more will have to be made unemployed before Labour ministers listen to charities, GPs, supermarkets, manufacturers and care providers who visited me in my constituency, who've come and said that that Labour need to think again about their catastrophic national insurance rise, which before it even hits in April is already costing the jobs of my constituents?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've got a significant reform plan to make sure that we tailor job centre support towards the needs of employers, because there's still a significant number of vacancies out there that young people ought to be making the most of and able to start their career and to progress in life. And that's why we've got a new employer strategy so that the Department for Work and Pensions can serve businesses properly.
Neil Duncan-Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Disabled people often face additional barriers, of course, when it comes to trying to get back into work. Rather than freezing or cutting their benefits, does the Minister acknowledge that we will need to invest in those people to help them and sustain them back into work?
Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I do agree. We see potential in every single person in this country. And many of those who've been written off and left on the scrap heap deserve a much better pathway back into work.
Marcus Campbell-Severs.
Question number 12, please, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department works collaboratively across other government departments and law enforcement agencies on investigations into benefit fraud carried out by organised criminal gangs. New powers in the fraud bill, previously mentioned by my honourable friend, will strengthen our capability to tackle organised crime by modernising and enhancing our investigation powers, granting DWP officials powers of search and seizure, and ensuring those defrauding the public sector face appropriate consequences.
Mr. Campbell-Severs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the new powers in the fraud bill and note the huge increase in pension credit fraud seen in recent years. Can the Minister explain how capital fraud and fraud where recipients stay out of the country longer than the rules require, both of which account for 50% of all pension credit fraud, will be targeted under the new rules?
Minister.
My honourable friend is entirely right to raise this issue, and the eligibility verification measure that is embedded within the new bill will do just that, providing a crucial data feed to help us identify fraud in pension credit as well as universal credit and employment support allowance. This will flag claimants who are potentially in breach of eligibility around capital and abroad criteria so that we can start to get the unacceptable level of fraud down and protect the public purse.
Luke Akers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question number 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our commitment to the triple lock throughout this Parliament means spending on the state pension is set to rise by £31 billion a year. Individuals are set to see increases of up to £1,900 a year, benefiting 21,000 pensioners in North Durham and 12 million people across Britain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank the Minister for that answer. In addition to protecting the triple lock for every pensioner in the country, I welcome that the Government is tackling the biggest issues for pensioners by uprating pension credit higher than the rate of inflation, encouraging higher take-up of pension credit and substantially increasing funding for our NHS. Can the Minister tell me how many pensioners in North Durham currently claim pension credit and how many are entitled to it but don't claim it and could benefit from this increase?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend is absolutely right about the importance of the 4.1% increase in pension credit that will take place in just a few weeks' time. And there are around 3,000 people claiming pension credit in North Durham. But my honourable friend is also absolutely right to highlight the more than £25 billion investment this government is making in the NHS. The unacceptable state of the health service is the biggest betrayal of old generations by the party opposite, and we are going to change that.
Number 14, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In the year to September 2024, 4.7% of working age people were unemployed in Stoke-on-Trent. But as I mentioned in response to answers just now, that often masks bigger problems with economic inactivity, often due to ill health. And that's why our plan is to join up work, health and skills support and for local areas across England to have a Get Britain Working plan so that every part of this country has a plan to grow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's quite clear that the government is sincere in its attempt to remove the barriers facing people with mental health conditions into work. So could I issue an invitation to and commend to the Minister the work of the Combined Healthcare Trust in Stoke-on-Trent and their peer support mentors. These are people who have overcome mental health challenges into work, who now work with other people struggling with their own mental health to build confidence and opportunity. Whatever plan the government's bringing forward, Mr. Speaker, this sort of work should be central to it, and I think if they came to see it, they'd be very impressed.
Mr. Speaker, I'd love to come to Stoke, and there are so many football-related jokes I could make at this point, but I will not trouble the House. I would love to come to Stoke, not just on a wet Tuesday, but the member makes the case for exactly the strategy underpinning our reform, which is to join up health and work support. I have seen in my own constituency the power of peer mentors for mental health conditions, and I would love to come to see the brilliant work that he himself has just reported to the House.
Williams.
16, please, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Many disabled people want to work, but were written off and failed by the last government. Our Work Aspirations survey of health and disability claimants found that a third wanted to work at some point in future if their health improved or the right job was available, and 200,000 said they would work now if they got the right support. This government will ensure disabled people who can work have the same rights and chances to work as everybody else, because that principle of equality is what this Labour government is for.
David Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Christopher, a resident of Talk in my constituency, was badly let down by a flawed PIP assessment, one that lacked basic humanity and empathy. Now, with reports of welfare reforms in the media, he is deeply worried about what the future holds. So can I ask the Minister what steps will be taken to ensure that people like Christopher are treated with fairness and dignity and given the support that they need?
Secretary of State.
I absolutely want to say to my honourable friend and his constituent that treating people with dignity and respect is at the heart of this government's plans. I know as a constituency MP for 14 long years under the Conservatives that there will always be people who cannot work because of the severity of their disability or their illness. But I also meet day in, day out, disabled people who are denied the chance of work for many different reasons. That is what we want to put right, to make sure that the social security system is there for those who need it, not just now, but for years to come.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As the Secretary of State puts in the report, is she considering the PIP reassessment process? And would she agree that it would be sensible when considering PIP reassessments for people whose conditions are not going to get any better, that unless they wish to be reassessed, it would be sensible to relieve them of the burden of that reassessment process? Less distressing for them, saving money in the system, and allowing people who do need reassessment to be reassessed faster.
Minister.
I agree with a lot of what the honourable gentleman says. Patience is never my greatest virtue, but I would ask him to be patient and the rest of the House to look at the full proposals that we will be putting forward imminently.
Josh McAllister.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Department supports care leavers aged 16 to 24 through an extensive range of interventions to help them into employment. For example, care leavers who start an apprenticeship are signposted to a £3,000 bursary from their training provider and, of course, can still receive universal credit if on a low income. More broadly, under the new Youth Guarantee, all young people aged 18 to 21 years in England, including care leavers, will have access to support to enter employment, education or training opportunities.
Josh McAllister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for the answer. 39% of young care experienced people are not in education, employment or training. That's 3 times the average rate, and it's costing the UK in lost tax revenue alone over £145 million a year. We can't achieve the ambition of getting Britain working unless we untap the potential
of this amazing group of young people. So will ministers agree with me that we need to take bold, imaginative action to radically improve the number who are going into work?
My honourable friend is absolutely correct to highlight those statistics. The number of care leavers not in education, employment or training is absolutely unacceptable, and he will be stunned to hear that I am in full agreement with him.
Come to topicals, Jessica Till.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, this week is Sign Language Week, and my right honourable friend, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, will be speaking in the backbench debate to mark Sign Language Week on Thursday. This week is also Neurodiversity Celebration Week. Neurodivergent people face particular barriers to employment, with less than 1 in 3 in work. Everyone deserves the chance to fulfil their potential, so we recently launched a new independent panel to advise us on these issues. The experts on this panel, including neurodivergent people themselves, will present their recommendations to us later this year, and I very much look forward to their findings.
Jessica Till.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I visited the Crumbs project in my constituency, Bournemouth West. Crumbs provides training for people with disabilities and mental health conditions to get the professional skills they need to go into the hospitality industry and the personal skills they need to live independently. 90% of their trainees move into employment. So given the Secretary of State's commitment to bringing people with long-term health conditions and disabilities back into work, what more support can she give to successful programmes like Crumbs?
Secretary of State.
I welcome the work that Crumbs is doing in my honourable friend's constituency. I want to make sure that not only do we overhaul our job centres, have a new youth guarantee, join up work, health and skills support through our Get Britain working plan, but that crucially our job centres and others work closely with organisations like that, because it is only by working together that we will get the right support to help people on a pathway to work and a pathway to success.
Secretary of State Helen Waisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We heard yesterday that the Cabinet had not yet seen the welfare plan that the Right Honourable Lady is apparently due to announce tomorrow. Given all the media briefings, the apprehension of disabled people and the growing number of people not working, none of us would want to see that delayed. So can she assure us that she has got collective agreement so she can announce her plan here in this chamber tomorrow?
Secretary of State.
The Honourable Lady will have to show a little patience, and she talks about plans. We've seen her and the Shadow Chancellor writing in various newspapers claiming about their plan, but there never was a plan. There never was a plan. The former Chancellor, the Right Honourable Member for Godalming and Ash, actually admitted this during the election when he said that the numbers had already been scored, and the only thing that they ever put forward was ruled illegal by the courts. They had 14 years to put this right. This government will act.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was listening very hard to that answer, and from everything I heard, she still doesn't have the support of her Cabinet colleagues with less than 24 hours to go. It was a no. There's never a good time for millions of people to be out of work, but as the world gets more dangerous, we can afford neither the benefits bill nor the waste of human potential. Given the opposition of her party to welfare reform, can she assure me that her planned reforms will grasp the nettle and bring the benefits bill down?
This from a government that left 1 in 10 working age people on a sickness and disability benefit, 1 in 8 young people not in education, employment or training, 2.8 million people out of work due to long-term sickness. Terrible for them, their life chances, their incomes and health, and terrible for taxpayers who are paying for an ever-spiralling bill for the costs of failure. Unlike the party opposite who wrote people off and then blamed them to get a cheap headline, we will take decisive action, get people into work and get this country on a pathway to success.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The number of young people not in education, training or work is disproportionately high in areas like Hartlepool that I represent, something that the party opposite did nothing about in 14 years. Can I ask the Secretary of State, how will she ensure that opportunity for young people reaches every part of our country?
Secretary of State.
We will never get this country growing again unless we provide good jobs, hope and opportunity in every part of the country, including in my honourable friend's constituency. He knows his region has one of the highest levels of people not in education, employment or training. Our youth guarantee will ensure every young person is earning or learning, and I look forward to working with him to deliver that on the ground.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Steve Darling.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And will the Minister confirm that those people in receipt of disability benefits but profoundly cannot work will not face a cut in their benefits? Thank you.
I would say to the honourable gentleman, just as the right honourable member, the Minister for Social Security and Disability, we know that people there will always be people who cannot work because of the nature of their disability or health condition, and those people will be protected.
Jim Dickens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For many people living in Dartford, being given the opportunity to learn new skills would open the door to work, particularly with the prospect of new infrastructure projects like the Lower Thames Crossing on the horizon. Can the Minister reassure me that she's working with the Education Secretary to give all young people a route into good work?
Yes, it's not only that we are working closely together to expand the number of apprenticeships for young people, to look at changing the rules so you don't always have to have some of those, the basic GCSE maths and English to be able to get that new foundation apprenticeships. I think we need to go further by working closely with our schools. In my own constituency, on Friday I visited a school which is looking closely at the sort of risk factors for becoming NEET, and that is where we really need to take action.
Tim Farron.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Secretary of State co-chairs the Child Poverty Task Force. Will she confirm that that task force's brief will be very wide-ranging, including looking at children in poverty in dispersed rural communities like mine, but also taking practical steps to tackle poverty amongst migrant children whose parents have no recourse to public funds?
Absolutely, the child poverty strategy is looking widely, how we can increase people's incomes, including through work, how we can reduce costs, how we can ensure families are more financially resilient, looking at issues like debt and savings, and looking at how we give all children the best start in life, no matter their background, no matter where they live.
Jenny Riddle-Carpenter.
Will the Minister provide an update on the Jobs Plus pilot and what assessment has been given to its future rollout, including widening it to geographies including Suffolk Coastal?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Jobs Plus pilots were launched in July 2024 and are helping address employment barriers for residents of 10 social housing communities. We plan to publish our initial evaluation this summer, which will help us understand more about how this type of innovative community-led employment might support our vision to get Britain working, and I look forward to working with all members, especially her, on the next steps with this project.
Bradley Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are many fantastic organisations across Bromsgrove and the villages, including Legacy Martial Arts, the Basement Project and the Scouts, that do fantastic work to support young people. The committed individuals behind these, the work that they do, it bolsters the confidence, skills and mental health of young people. So will the Minister join me in thanking these organisations for the work that they do across my constituency, and will the Minister outline what support is available to these organisations to support them in the valuable work that they do?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I absolutely will join the member in thanking all of those organisations he just mentioned in his constituency. And if I might say to him that if he could link them up with his local job centre so that we can help make that connection between young people who really suffered disadvantage and that really positive community support that is available for them in his constituency, that would be very helpful.
Manjeet Singh Desi.
Nearly 1 in 7 young people in the UK are not in work, education or training. That's an 11-year high. So, Secretary of State, given that my Slough constituency is the youth capital of Britain, what is the government doing to ensure that young people have the opportunities to build the successful careers and futures that they so fully deserve?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And As my honourable friend mentions, there are important opportunities in Slough that young people growing up there need to be able to take advantage of, and that's why we launched our youth guarantee as part of our plan to get Britain working. It will be there for 18 to 21-year-olds, and again, if I might encourage him to work with his local job centre in Slough as we improve the support that's available for young people.
Vicky Slade.
Mr Speaker, Sarah in my constituency of Mid Dorset North Pool left an abusive relationship, but on applying for maintenance her ex-partner denied parentage, putting the children through DNA tests, delaying things, claiming special expenses, then declaring nil earnings despite having just bought a house with a mortgage, accepted with no investigation, is now being asked to pay back his arrears of thousands of pounds at £1 per month. What is being done to review the burden of proof for income and support parents and children being financially abused even after they've left relationships? Good question.
Minister.
The honourable member may be aware that the department recently consulted on a range of proposals for future improvements to the child maintenance service, including how we can protect people from financial abuse and better support victims of domestic abuse. I'm not familiar, obviously, with the specifics of the case that she references, but if she'd like to write to me about that, I'd be more than happy to follow up.
Sir Simon Hopper.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And pension credit claims, as we've heard, have increased by 64%. I'd like to commend the Minister and the Department, and also Citizen Advice in Stroud, and in fact throughout the country, for making this happen. However, there are 800,000 people who are earning just above that limit and living in poverty. And I wonder whether, when fiscal situation arises, whether they will review the cap and indeed the gradient of this benefit. Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The honourable member is absolutely right to highlight both the progress that has been made and the hard work of the voluntary sector, including Citizens Advice Bureaus right across the country. But we must continue the recent progress, and we will still certainly be doing so. But I'd also like to highlight that our support for pensioners goes far wider, including the 4.1% increase to the state pension and to the level of pension credit that the honourable member mentions in just a few weeks' time.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Last week at a constituency meeting, I was told that small businesses are starting to ask employees to go self-employed as they can't otherwise keep roles open because of forthcoming national insurance contribution rises and extra employment laws. Is this a trend that the department will be watching out for in its data in case it wasn't the government's intention to make workers less secure with these new taxes and more regulations?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, since I and Secretary of State and other ministers have taken office, we have published a number of research reports, data and other bits of information that the DWP had previously sat on. So I think she can be rest assured that we monitor employment trends and are keen to make sure that the DWP is far more transparent about data than it has been before.
No law.
Mr Speaker, my constituent Heidi recently moved off benefits back into work, only to find that she was earning less than when she was on benefits. Meanwhile, my constituent Tyrone is blind, has cerebral palsy and is autistic, and although he's an aspiring DJ, may struggle to find permanent work. So what steps is the Minister taking to ensure that we take a balanced approach, supporting those who cannot work with protection and dignity and security, whilst ensuring those that can work go back into work?
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend sets out very well exactly the balance that we need to strike with our plan. Proper employment support on the one hand, which hasn't been available in the past, and dealing with work disincentives in the current system as well. And I think when he sees the proposals shortly, he will welcome the measures that we're planning.
Kirsten Blightman.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. If someone has an amputation, schizophrenia, terminal cancer or uncontrolled epilepsy, can the Minister please reassure them that tomorrow's announcements will not mean a cut in their social security?
Well, Mr Speaker, as we've made clear already today, we are absolutely determined to protect those who need to be protected in the proposals that we're bringing forward. I think she'll welcome the proposals when she sees them and be reassured by them.
Sarah Smith.
Speaker, there are currently thousands of children and now adults, of disabled children and adults across the country, including in Hindburn and Hassington, who cannot access their childhood tax funds. How is the Minister working to address this with the Ministry of Justice to help families gain quick and easy access to these? And would he give further consideration to increasing the scope of the DWP appointee scheme to cover child tax funds and junior ISAs up to £5,000?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I welcome my honourable friend's interest in this, and she and I have met to discuss it. She's absolutely right. There should be no barriers in place to the young people and their families accessing the funds. The Ministry of Justice has made some progress already. I don't think the answer is going to be altering the DWP appointee scheme, but there will be further progress to make things easier.
So Desmond Swain.
What's the Minister's estimate for the number of pensioners who would qualify for pension credit but haven't applied in North Durham?
Well said. Yeah, Minister.
I thank the honourable member for his question. The Department for Work and Pensions doesn't produce data at the level of the constituency on the question he raised, but I'll tell him the answer at a national level, which is much lower than it was before this government came to office.
Whereas, Mr. Speaker, supporting people back into work is not only the right thing to do for the UK economy, but also the fair and compassionate thing to do for people stuck in the welfare system. However, over the last few days, a significant number of people have contacted my constituency office with profound concerns about what they have heard and read in the press. Does the Minister agree with me that by removing the culture of fear and creating a nurturing environment, we can help people back into work and give them the support they need to survive, not just to survive, but to thrive?
My honourable friend is absolutely right. We are absolutely determined to provide proper support. There has been proper support in the past. It disappeared after 2010. We want to provide that support again because so many people would thrive if they had it. We know there are 200,000 people at the moment out of work on health and disability grounds who would love to be in the job if they just had the support, and we're going to provide it.
Shambar.
Mr. Speaker, now for weeks the government's active trailing of welfare cuts has generated genuine fear. Disabled people in Brighton Pavilion are writing to me in literal terror. So will the Secretary of State apologise for this and reassure the public that actual benefit changes will not take place this calendar year or without parliamentary votes in this House?
Minister.
Well, the honourable member, first of all, I recognise there has been a good deal of anxiety, and I regret that that has occurred. But there won't be long to wait. The proposals will soon become clear, and I think she will welcome a great deal of the changes that we want to make.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. York, as a human rights city, believes that disabled people should be at the heart of all decision-making. So could the Minister say how disabled people have formed his views in bringing these changes forward and have been at the heart of the decision-making here?
Well, my honourable friend is right, and we have in our manifesto a very firm commitment that the views and voices of disabled people should be at the heart of everything we do. So over the last week, I've had discussions with a number of disabled people's fora, and when we come forward with our proposals shortly, we will be consulting very extensively with disabled people and their organisations about the right way forward.
Andrew Stone.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. After the government announced billions of cuts to the Secretary of State's department, and having over recent days seen ministers making U-turn after U-turn, and in the media round over the weekend spinning out of control, is there anything meaningfully left out of the Secretary of State's original plans for welfare to announce?
There's nothing meaningful in your
Secretary of State.
From a party that left a broken welfare system that is failing the people who depend on it and failing taxpayers. They had 14 years to put it right, and we know what their legacy is. Honourable members will see the proposals soon, but we will not shy away from the decisions that we believe are right to give opportunities to people who can work, security for those who can't, and get the welfare bill on a sustainable footing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Telegraph today has done a right hatchet job on the most socially deprived ward in my constituency. And the people of the East Marsh, quite frankly, are sick and tired of journalists taking a day trip and coming and writing their poverty porn stories about people who are proud and keen to play their part in society in every way that they possibly can. They've sought to pit older people against younger people, highlighting the neat records. The young people in that ward are as keen to work as anybody else, but they need the jobs to do it. What discussions is she having to get that trade?
Well, there'll be no greater representative for her constituents than my right honourable friend, who rightly says they want the right chances and choices and support to work as anybody else. That's why we're creating more good jobs in every part of the country through our modern industrial strategy. We're improving the quality of work and making work pay through our employment rights bill, and our Get Britain working plan will give the work, skills and...
See, it's topical. I've got a few members still get in. Peter Bedford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's right that the welfare system supports those with disabilities. However, does the Secretary of State agree with me that social media influencers that are teaching people to game the Motability system in order to get free vehicles is a disgrace? And if so, what does she intend to do about it?
Minister.
Well, the honourable gentleman will be aware that this falls under the umbrella of wider fraud. We inherited an appalling level of fraud in the welfare system under the previous government. Our fraud bill goes some way to tackling that as part of a broader package, £8.6 billion, the largest ever package brought forward to tackle fraud.
Steve Witherden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that nearly half of families in poverty have a disabled member, and without PIP, an additional 700,000 disabled households could be pushed into poverty, I am concerned that the rumoured cuts will not help people into work, but will instead drive them further into destitution. What assurances can the Minister give that the voices of disabled people have been heard and reflected in the upcoming Green Paper?
Mr. Speaker, I can give him a very firm commitment about that, and an assurance that not only that we have been listening, but we shall continue to listen once the proposals have been published.
Jim Allister, final question. Sorry.
Thank you. I previously urged the Secretary of State to liaise with the Department of Communities in Northern Ireland over its pitiful pursuit of benefit fraud. In the same vein, is the Minister aware that of the 39,000 new vehicles registered in Northern Ireland last year, 18,000 were under the mobility scheme? Isn't that indicative of appalling abuse of that scheme? And will the Secretary of State raise with the Department of Communities what they're doing about it?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Motability scheme is a very valuable scheme, very highly valued by disabled people around the UK. If he has examples of misuse of that scheme, I would very much like to see those. But it's a scheme which is greatly prized, I think, right across the House, and I think he would discover that if he talked to other members about it.
Right, that completes questions.
Thank you.
Right, let us come to the urgent question. Home Secretary Minister for Justice Robert Jenrick.
To ask the Justice Secretary if she will make a statement on the Sentencing Council's imposition of community and custodial sentencing guidelines.
Minister.
The Sentencing Council, Mr. Speaker, is independent of Parliament and Government. The Council decides on its own priorities and work plan for producing guidelines. The Sentencing Council consulted the previous Government on a revised version of the imposition guideline, which included new guidance on pre-sentence reports. That consultation ran from November 2023 to February 2024. The previous Government responded to the consultation on this guideline on the 19th of February 2024. law. The former Sentencing Minister, who is now the Shadow Transport Secretary, wrote to the Chair of the Sentencing Council thanking him for the revisions to this guideline. In particular, he thanked the Council for fuller guidance around the circumstances in which courts should request a pre-sentence report. The Lord Chancellor, Mr Speaker, was clear about her discontent with the guideline when it was published. It is our view that there should not be differential treatment before the law. The Lord Chancellor, the House will be pleased to hear, met with the Chair of the Sentencing Council last week, and the discussion was constructive. It was agreed that the Lord Chancellor will set out her position more fully in writing, which the Sentencing Council will then consider before the guideline is due to come into effect.
Robert Jenrick.
Well, Mr Speaker, in just 14 days' time, new two-tier sentencing rules come into force. Sentencing rules that infect our ancient justice system with the virus of identity politics, dividing fellow citizens on the basis of their skin colour and religion, rules that ride roughshod over the rule of law and destroy confidence in our criminal justice system. The stakes are high, but the Justice Secretary seems clueless. In fact, she isn't even here at all. Has the department conducted an assessment of the additional pre-sentence reports that will be required and the impact on the probation service, given that they're already working above capacity? Are they considering providing the probation service with additional resources to cope with the extra demand? And do they expect the additional pre-sentence reports to lead to further delays in our courts? I ask these questions because not only do these new rules violate the most foundational principle of equality before the law, but they also create immense pressure on the criminal justice system. If the Justice Secretary wanted to stop two-tier justice, she would have supported my bill on Friday. She would have used her powers of appointment to sack the individuals who drafted the rules. Time is running out, and so is confidence in the Sentencing Council. And frankly, the public are losing confidence in the Justice Secretary and her ministers too. I can't help escape the conclusion that the Justice Secretary actually supports these two-tier sentencing rules. Why? Because she supported a group which called the criminal justice system institutionally racist. Her representatives walked through the two-tier guidance and approved them. And she refuses to legislate to block the guidance coming into force or to take any sanction against the members of the Sentencing Council that drafted them. If there's one thing we know about Labour governments, is that they always end in tears. This time, it's a second-tier Justice Secretary pursuing two-tier justice, all to suck up to her boss, two-tier Keir.
Well, Mr Speaker, there's one thing we do know about Labour governments. They always have to clear up the mess left by Conservative governments. And that's what the Lord Chancellor is doing at the moment, clearing up the mess left by this previous government, the clogged up courts, the overflowing prisons, the overworked probation. The Lord Chancellor, though, back to the facts of the case, met with the Council last Thursday, had a constructive discussion. It was agreed that she will set out her position more fully in writing, which the Sentencing Council will then consider before the guideline is due to come into effect. This is serious government, not auditioning for government. The party opposite were not only consulted, but they welcomed these guidelines when they were in office. The former Minister for Sentencing wrote a letter of welcome to the Council setting this out on the 19th of February 2024. There's a process in place now which needs to be allowed to play out. We will not preempt that process.
Chair of the Select Committee, Andrew Slaughter.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. The Sentencing Council, it shouldn't need saying, is a non-political body whose guidelines are carefully drafted and widely consulted on. These guidelines received positive responses from the Justice Select Committee under its previous chair and the previous government. They do not require that a pre-sentence report is ordered. They do not limit who should be the subject of such a report, and they do not tie the hands of the sentencer. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that by dragging the Sentencing Council into the political arena,
without good cause, the Shadow Justice Secretary degrades both the Council and himself.
Minister.
I think my honourable friend, the Chair of the Select Committee, makes a good point about the way in which the Shadow Justice Secretary conducts himself. The important thing is that the Lord Chancellor met with a constructive meeting with the Chair of the Sentencing Council, and there is now a process in place to address this issue.
Josh Babarindo, Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to think that we all believe in equality under the law in this House on sentencing matters and otherwise, but it's clear that two-tier justice has existed in our country, having been governed by two-tier Tories who thought they could get away with illegal number 10 parties while the rest of us told to stay at home. Two-tier Tories like the Shadow Justice Secretary who unlawfully approved a development for his donor. Two-tier Tories who have pummeled our prisons and crashed our courts, leaving victims to pay the price. So can the Minister tell us how he will reform sentencing in England and Wales to protect the victims and survivors so let down by the Conservatives?
Minister.
The honourable member is perfectly right to underline the importance of equality before the law, and he gives me the opportunity to give a plug to the review of sentencing, the independent review of sentencing being conducted by David Gauke with an independent panel which will address the issues that he's raised.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does my honourable friend agree with me that if there is a two-tier justice system, it's not one that's claimed by the benches opposite, but it is certainly one that is created by them. It's one where victims of crime are let down by delays, where working-class communities see justice delayed and denied, and where the reality remains that black and ethnic minority defendants are disproportionately sentenced. So does he agree that instead of playing political games with sentencing, we should focus on delivering real justice, ensuring that every decision made in our courts is based on evidence, not on culture wars or headlines in right-wing rags?
My honourable friend is right to contrast the approach of sound bites from the Shadow Justice Secretary to the approach of rolling up her sleeves and getting on with the job and sorting out the mess left in our prisons, left in our probation service, left in our courts by the party opposite.
Councillor Edward Lee.
Just to be constructive for a moment, to try and get a bit of consensus on this, surely no one is suggesting that anybody in Parliament wants to restrict the power of judges, their traditional right to sentence people according to their own lights. All we're questioning is whether a quango like the Sentencing Council should try and stack the deck against certain groups. And all we're saying is that judges should impose sentences irrespective of people's race, colour or whatever.
Minister.
My honourable neighbour, the Father of the House, brings a constructive note, and I agree exactly with what he's saying. We've got an independent judiciary which we should let get on with the job.
Emma Foodie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a former magistrate myself, I've personally been involved in sentencing decisions and have relied and can attest to the importance of pre-sentencing reports. Given as much information about an offender as possible before deciding appropriate sentences, and used properly, these can cut re-offending rates. Does the Minister agree with me that they should therefore be available for all offenders, and access to these reports shouldn't be determined by an offender's ethnicity, culture or faith?
Minister.
My honourable friend is exactly right. Pre-sentence reports play a very important role, and they are we ought to applaud the work that the probation service and others do in preparing these reports, and she's exactly right to point to how effective they are in helping with sentencing.
Sir Jeremy Wright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister must be right to stress the independence of the Sentencing Council, but would he accept he can't criticise the Shadow Secretary of State for having a view on these draft guidelines when the Secretary of State herself has done exactly that? Yes. But can I also ask him to consider in this debate the real purpose of a pre-sentence report? It's there to give more information about an offender, but it's also there to enable a judge to impose a non-custodial sentence if they believe that's the appropriate course. It's very hard for a sentencer to do that unless someone's been assessed as suitable for a community penalty. So whatever the rights and wrongs of this debate, isn't it important now that the Sentencing Council makes clear that what's important in deciding whether to ask for a pre-sentence report is whether that extra information is needed and not anything else, including protected characteristics.
Minister.
I think that's exactly what the Lord Chancellor is saying.
Tony Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree with me that there's a fatal flaw in the Shadow Justice Secretary's case, and which is that his party worked for months in order to develop the very guidelines of which they now complain? And does he further agree with me that rather than desperately scoring own goals for his party, he should get behind this government's reforms to clear up the mess left by his party?
Minister.
To be fair to the party opposite, they did not work on these guidelines, but they were consulted on them and they did respond to them in a positive way.
Just Brownfellow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I note the comments by the Chair of the Sentencing Council, Lord Justice William Davis, who said that ministers from both Labour and the Conservatives, all their representatives, had known about the plan since 2022 and did not object. So whilst I am disappointed that the government is only acting reactively now, does the Minister not agree with me that the Shadow Secretary of State has no shame and it's hard to take his faux outrage seriously when this is really just another audition for Tory leader?
I think the Honourable Lady has said what everybody else in this House and outside this House are thinking.
Steve Young.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister will agree with me that the benches opposite have some explaining to do. Yeah. Given that the Sentencing Council's consultation on the guidelines that recommended differing approaches for those from an ethnic background was undertaken during the previous government's time, that the previous government was a statutory consultee, and it was welcomed by the government at the time.
My honourable friend is exactly right. The members opposite, the government of which they were members, were fully involved in the consultation, and not only were they fully involved, but they welcomed it.
Roger Gay.
Mr. Speaker, coming to this fresh and as one without a legal background, it does seem to me that there are matters here of very great importance that ought to be properly debated by this House. But would the Minister agree with me that this is yet another classic example of where the much vaunted separation of powers is likely to interfere with that process?
I think this is the third week in which we've discussed this in this House, Mr. Speaker. We discussed it at the Lord Chancellor's statement, and then we discussed it at Justice Oral's last week, and we're discussing it again today.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for his statement today. I think it's been mentioned already that pre-sentencing reports are really important for judges. However, does he agree with me that they should be available for all offenders and shouldn't be determined by offenders' ethnicities and culture and faith? And I would add to the member from Eastbourne that under the last government we also had a two-tier probation system.
I absolutely agree with the point my honourable friend is making.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Sentencing Council understand that with these guidelines, they are totally out of touch with the mood of the British people, totally out of touch with the mood of the government, totally out of touch with the mood of this House, and therefore why will they not agree to delay these guidelines until it's been properly debated upon in this House?
To be fair to the Chair of the Sentencing Council, he met with the Lord Chancellor last week. It was a constructive meeting. He is awaiting the letter from the Lord Chancellor, which he promises the Council will consider and respond to before the 1st of April.
Mr. Strathern.
Speaker, as a former local authority lead for youth justice, I saw firsthand how important pre-sentencing reports can be in shaping effective and progressive outcomes from justice. However, it cannot be right that access to them is determined by factors such as race and religion. So can I applaud the Justice team for making sure that it has such a strong and robust response to the Sentencing Council's guidance released so far? And can they assure me that, unlike the last government, who was clearly asleep at the wheel during the consultation, we remain willing to take whatever action is needed to uphold this important principle?
I agree with my honourable friend that the last government appears to have been asleep at the wheel and has only rediscovered their mojo once they've got into opposition. But I agree with what he says.
Thank you. Mr. McVeigh.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Last week, the Prime Minister announced he was abolishing NHS England to make sure the NHS was brought back under democratic control. So will the Minister be lobbying the Prime Minister to abolish the Sentencing Council to make sure that sentencing is brought back under democratic control?
I thank the former Common Sense Minister for her question. If she'll stop gabbling and listen, I'll attempt to answer her question. So, I think she's getting a little bit ahead of herself, Mr. Speaker. There is a process in place, constructive meeting with the Sentencing Council, letter to Sentencing Council respond.
John Barron.
Mr. Speaker, I don't believe that the Shadow Secretary of State believes that the law is currently applied equally and free of structural biases. But given the unfortunate politicisation of all of this, doesn't the Secretary of State, doesn't the Minister now back the Chair of the Sentencing Council, who says that the State should not determine the sentence imposed on an individual offender, and that sentencing guidelines of whatever kind, if they were to be dictated in any way by ministers, that would breach an important principle?
Come on,
there are certain things that are matters of policy which are for the government and for Parliament. We've had a constructive meeting with the Sentencing Council. There's a letter going to the Sentencing Council, and the Sentencing Council will respond to that. And we totally respect the independence of our judiciary.
Sir Gavin Williams.
Just the other week, the Lord Chancellor, I think, made it clear that she didn't agree with the direction the Sentencing Council was going in, and I think all of us hope that her meetings with the Sentencing Council will produce the results. However, if they don't, will the Minister commit to working across party, because I think there is a real commitment on these benches to work with him to bring forward emergency legislation if that is required?
Absolutely.
I thank the honourable member for the constructive tone of his question. I refer him to the point that we don't want to get ahead of ourselves. We need to allow the current process to go forward, and we need to respect the Sentencing Council's role in that current process, and then we'll address things when we need to address them.
Joshua Redden.
Speaker, we are now in the bizarre position where the body that advises judges on how to judge may now decide to go to court for a ruling on whether ministers have the power to tell judges what to do or not. So what preparation has his department done for that possibility?
I'm afraid I'm becoming a bit repetitive, Mr. Speaker. There is a desire from the members opposite to rush ahead, and I have great respect for that. Well, you had 14 years, and what did you do in 14 years? Sorry, Mr. Speaker, not you. So they're trying to rush ahead, Mr. Speaker, and we will take things steadily in the right pace with proper respect.
Sir Desmond Sway. Sway.
Mr. Speaker. So, on a point of great importance to the Lord Chancellor, she is reduced to asking the Sentencing Council to change their mind. The former Minister for Common Sense is right. There is a lesson here for all parliamentarians about the way we delegate powers to quangos, which then clearly come up with solutions which we find repulsive.
There was a constructive meeting. I think if he'd have been in the meeting, he would not have seen it as somebody asking. It was a constructive meeting, constructive exchange of views, proper process in place, which I am confident will come up with the right answer.
Nick Timothy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's obviously ridiculous that the Justice Secretary is on her knees before Okwango asking them to respect the principle of equality before the law, and this is actually not the only example. The Judicial College Equal Treatment Handbook says, quotes, "To treat some persons equally, we must treat them differently." Will the Minister condemn this logic and say, no, we must not treat defendants differently because of their race or religion?
The government does not believe there should be differential treatment before the law. The Lord Chancellor has been very clear about that. The Equal Treatment Bench Book to which he alludes is written by and for the judges, and ministers have no involvement whatsoever in its content.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Minister agree with me and many of my honourable friends that policy decisions by unelected, non-departmental departmental bodies like the Sentencing Council are eroding public confidence in our democratic institutions? And will he commit to scrapping such bodies so that policy is always made by ministers that are directly accountable to this House?
Hear, hear. Well said, Peter.
Policy decisions should be always made by this House. He's right. He's absolutely correct on this. The reality is that the background to where we are today is that the Sentencing Council consulted with the government of the day, members of whom are sitting now opposite this. Those members in that government of the day were asleep at the wheel, and now it's down to this government yet again to pick up the pieces that they've left for us to pick up and sort out their mess.
Lewis Coppin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents in Broxbourne are confused about the Justice Secretary's position. She says she believes these sentencing guidelines are wrong in principle and that they amount to differential treatment before the law. But she is in government, Mr. Speaker. She has the powers and the tools at her disposal to stop this and change it. Why hasn't she?
I've tried to explain this, so I'll explain it again once more. The Justice Secretary, the Lord Chancellor, has been extremely clear that she believes in equality before the law, and she is not happy with these guidelines. That's why she wrote immediately they were published, unlike the party opposite that had sight of these earlier in the consultation and actually just not, they didn't actually ignore them, they responded in a very positive way to them.
Keep talking a bit, but one of us is going to sit down. It's not going to be me, Minister. Thank you. Look, I know there's things to do and there's some points for us to follow. Jim Shannon.
Speaker, the Minister is an honourable man, and I have to ask a question on behalf of the victims, if he doesn't mind. The Minister will understand that any reform of sentencing must have its heart the victims. For most victims, the authenticity or the perpetrator is not what their concern is. The severity of the crime and the lasting impact on their life is the issue. For many victims today who will feel that the sentencing guidelines plays politics with justice, what resources will the victims have? Recourse will victims have that their justice means time served for crimes committed and not based on ethnicity? Justice is blind, and so also must the sentencing be.
My honourable friend will not be surprised to know that I agree with him. I've got the Victims Minister sat next to me, and we take the role of victims very seriously. That's why there's a victims representative on the sentencing review panel, and whatever comes forward, we need to make sure that victims are centre of what we're doing. I've met with too many victims already in this role, and every time I meet with them, it is very, very difficult. A little bit difficult for me, but hugely difficult for them because they are living things.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it seems like every week we're back here, every week dealing with culture wars.
Is this a reflection on me giving the UQ? Because I'm beginning to feel it's aimed at me. It's here today because I thought it was appropriate, not because it's here every week. Right, let's have somebody else.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Judging by lack of action, it does appear that the Justice Secretary is comfortable with these changes that she has described as two-tier coming into effect in just 2 weeks. We've heard that the Justice Secretary is unhappy. If that really is the case, other than cordial and cosy meetings, can the Minister tell the House and the country what the Secretary of State is doing to prevent two-tier justice?
The Lord Chancellor has made her position clear. She met immediately with the Sentencing Council. She's writing to the Sentencing Council again to set out her concerns. The Sentencing Council has committed to respond to those quickly.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. So the Minister has told us, and he complains about having to explain the government's position, but why can't he just explain to us why hasn't the Secretary of State fixed it yet? Because at the moment it seems they've had a meeting, but she hasn't even written a letter in the last 3 weeks explaining what she actually wants to happen, which is why, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much indeed for having this urgent question again today, because the Minister hasn't actually fixed the problem which we're all talking about.
The consultation was under the previous government. The previous government not only didn't express concern, they welcomed what the Sentencing Council was doing. Immediately, the Lord Chancellor has seen the guidelines as drafted. She's acted. This is a Lord Chancellor acting to sort out the mess left by the party opposite.
Lincolnshire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister says that the situation is completely clear, so I feel like a bit of an idiot asking for a bit more clarification, but I will anyway. Pre-sentencing reports are allowed to take in further background on the lives of offenders from ethnic minorities, cultural minorities and/or faith minority communities. What is the definition of a cultural minority? And are our veterans in this country considered a cultural minority or not?
I think the honourable member reads out the phrase which was welcomed by the previous government and which the current Lord Chancellor is objecting to and talking to the Sentencing Council about.
Andrew Snow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. On Wednesday, I challenged the Prime Minister directly on two-tier justice and gave him the opportunity to confirm he would back the Shadow Justice Secretary's bill to stop this in its tracks. In his attempts to scramble out of giving that commitment, he said something which has been repeated today, that the previous government was consulted and welcomed this guidance. However, the Sentencing Council themselves have already put in writing that the wording is different and therefore materially has a different outcome in what it would have been doing. So, given that the government has failed to take the opportunity the Shadow Justice Secretary had presented them to block this, will he confirm, was the Prime Minister right in what he said, or is the Sentencing Council right? Because they both can't be.
The letter that the previous government wrote to the Sentencing Council during the consultation is clear. They weren't just consulted, Mr. Speaker, they welcomed the guidance. The initial version of the guidance included reference to specific cohorts of offenders, including ethnic minorities.
Point of order, Robert. It's on this, obviously.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister has repeatedly told the House during the course of this urgent question that the previous government approved these guidelines, and in particular he besmirched the name of my honourable friend, the former sentencing minister, the member for Orpington. What he said to the House today was wrong, and was said so by the Sentencing Council in their letter to the Justice Secretary herself of the 10th of March of this year. Page 4, paragraph 4, the Sentencing Council made perfectly clear that the guidelines that were published under his government were materially different to those that were considered by the prior government. In fact, his own official was present at the very meeting of the Sentencing Council at which this version of the guidelines was signed off. Would he take this opportunity to correct the record? Because I'm afraid he's misled the House not once, not twice, but on numerous occasions today, and that's quite wrong.
Order. Nobody misleads the House. Inadvertently misled the House. I presume it was inadvertently misled the House.
Oh, I do hope it was
inadvertently. Right. Minister.
I don't believe I inadvertently misled the House, Mr. Speaker.
Let us move on. That completes. Now come to the statement, Foreign Secretary David Lammy.
Well, with permission, Mr. Speaker, I will make a statement on last week's meeting of G7 foreign ministers. We met, Mr. Speaker, at a pivotal moment. Some members of this House may have doubted we could find common ground. Some of our global competitors may have hoped that we would fail. But after 36 hours of talks, we were united, Mr. Speaker. Britain was united with our allies to make our citizens more secure. National security is a foundation of this government's plan for change and we are leading from the front. Mr. Speaker, the overriding priority was, of course, Ukraine. Last week in Jeddah, the United States and Ukraine reached a common position. A ceasefire offer is now on the table, and American weapons and intelligence are flowing once again. This demonstrated what this House has always known to have been true. Under President Zelensky's leadership, Ukraine is serious about peace, sincere in their efforts to pursue a just and lasting end to this appalling war, unrelenting in their determination to ensure that Ukraine remains democratic, free, strong and prosperous. At the G7, the UK and our allies were united in our unwavering support for Ukraine's defence of its freedom, united in support for Ukraine's pursuit of peace, united on what is required to make this happen. Now it is Putin who stands in the spotlight. Putin who must answer. Putin who must choose. Are you serious, Mr. Putin, about peace? Will you stop the fighting? Or will you drag your feet and play games? Play lip service to a ceasefire while still pummeling Ukraine? My warning to Mr. Putin is this. If you are serious, prove it with a full and unconditional ceasefire now. And if Putin does not deliver, Mr. Speaker, and I must tell the House that I currently see no sign yet that he is, the G7 meeting helped us ready the tools to get Russia to negotiate seriously. We're not waiting for the Kremlin. If they reject a ceasefire, we have more cards that we can play. We can all see the impact the G7's unprecedented sanctions have had on Russia's faltering economy. Social spending down, inflation and interest rates sky high. There can be no let-up in our efforts. In Canada, we discussed where we can go further to target their energy and defence sectors, further squeeze their oil revenues and use frozen Russian assets. At the same time, we will keep up our support to Ukraine. Europeans clearly need to shoulder our share of this responsibility. We in the UK are stepping up on drones, on munitions and on training, sending over 400 different capabilities to Ukraine and training over 50,000 recruits. And we've announced the biggest increase in UK defence spending since the end of the Cold War. We're urging our allies to do the same, so Ukraine is in the strongest possible position now and in any peace that follows. And tomorrow I will be hosting EU High Representative Kallas, the first such visits since we left the European Union. In this moment, Ukraine's friends should be working hand in glove, and that requires a new era in UK-EU security cooperation. Finally, we are taking the steps to ensure Russia does not come back for more. We know the history, Mr. Speaker. Budapest, Minsk, paper promises betrayed by Putin. Together with France, we are establishing a coalition willing to deter Russia from invading again. To be credible, it will need US support. But Britain and our allies recognise that we need to step up, and this government is leading the effort on multiple fronts. In the past week, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, convened the biggest gathering yet of those willing to play their part in ensuring Ukraine's future security. This followed my visit to Canada and my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary's trip to Paris. And this week, military planners from allies will gather for further discussions in the UK co-chaired with France. Mr. Speaker, Ukraine was our top priority, but our unity extended beyond Ukraine. The G7 united in support for the fragile ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages, the unhindered humanitarian aid into Gaza. And let me be clear to this House what I said to the G7. Hamas must release the hostages. For Israel to be secure, these terrorists can have no role in Gaza's future. But the complete blocking of aid in Gaza is appalling and unacceptable. Humanitarian aid should never be used as a political tool. We urge the Israeli government to change course. The G7 also discussed the Arab reconstruction plan for Gaza, an important signal on which we should build. The G7 also united behind an inclusive political transition in Syria. Stability in Syria bolsters UK security at home and abroad. We condemned the recent violence in Syria's coastal regions and called for those responsible to be held accountable. And we were united in increasing the pressure on Iran. Tehran is producing highly enriched uranium at a rate that makes a mockery of the limits set in the JCPOA. Iran can never be allowed to develop and acquire a nuclear weapon. President Trump has written to the Supreme Leader. And this weekend, the United States has responded strongly to the Houthi resumption of unacceptable attacks on international shipping. Iran must now change course, de-escalate and choose diplomacy. Mr. Speaker, the G7 also kept the spotlight on the conflicts in Sudan and the DRC. We denounced the atrocities in Sudan. The warring parties must protect civilians, cease hostilities and ensure unhindered humanitarian access. There was strong support for the conference I will host on Sudan next month, an important opportunity to get a political process moving. We also condemn the Rwanda-backed offensive in the eastern DRC, a flagrant breach of the DRC's territorial integrity. The M23 and Rwandan Defence Force must withdraw. All parties should support African-led mediation processes. Mr. Speaker, the G7 also reiterated our call for the restoration of Venezuelan democracy and reaffirmed our strong support for Guyana's sovereignty and territorial integrity. And as the G7 met, Armenia and Azerbaijan concluded negotiation on a historic peace agreement. We warmly welcome this achievement and encourage both sides to move to signature as soon as possible. It was a pleasure, Mr. Speaker, to be back in Canada, a proud sovereign nation in which I have family I visited since childhood and with whom we share a long history and a royal family. Their new leader, Prime Minister Carney, is in London today. I'm sure the whole House will congratulate him on his appointment. My fellow G7 ministers and I received a warm welcome to Quebec, home of my good friend, Minister Mélanie Joly. And we united behind a new Canadian-led initiative on maritime security, an example of their strong leadership. With growing threats from the Red Sea to the South China Sea, trade routes on which growth and all our economies rely, a strong collective response from the G7 matters to us all. Mr. Speaker, 50 years ago, a small group of Western leaders met just outside Paris, the origins of the G7. They did not agree on everything. They were from different political sides, 3 from the left, 3 from the right. It was a time of upheaval, war in the Middle East, an oil crisis and recession, the Bretton Woods system falling away. Many then as now were pessimistic about the ability of democracies to navigate the turbulence, but that generation rose to the challenge. With the G7, they tried something different. Its format allowed leaders to be honest with each other and so find common ground. Today, we must rise to these new challenges. In that same spirit of honesty and common purpose, Britain and our partners are stronger when we stand together. We are standing together right now. I commend this statement to the House.
So, Secretary of State, Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Foreign Secretary for the advanced sight of his statement today. There is much ground to cover in this statement in light of the vast global challenges we're all witnessing. On Ukraine, we continue to support Ukraine in this fight and the freedoms and values they are defending, democracy, liberty and the rule of law. It is very welcome that the US military aid and intelligence sharing has resumed, and vital that the US and Ukraine continue to work together in the face of this appalling conflict. May I ask the Foreign Secretary what discussions did he hold with US counterparts about the impact of the suspensions of intelligence and military support, and what is his assessment of the consequences caused? While we await further details of the proposed 30-day ceasefire, Russia's response shows exactly why the Euro-Atlantic community must be resolute in the face of Putin's aggression, and that he will seek to pursue long-held strategic objectives that he has not achieved on the battlefield through hypothetical negotiations, which means we must be robust. Britain must apply maximum pressure on the Kremlin, boost defence production and maintain our support for Ukraine's battlefield efforts. Britain must also use our convening role to work with allies who have other types of equipment that could plug capability gaps and broker extra support packages. Mr. Speaker, in the G7 Foreign Ministers' statement, there is a commitment to use extraordinary revenues stemming from the immobilised Russian sovereign assets. So can the Foreign Secretary confirm whether this means that the UK will go further than the £2.26 billion loan already announced off the back of the profits from sanctioned assets? And can he give an update on when proceeds from the sale of Chelsea FC will be in the hands of those most in need? Over the weekend, Mr. Speaker, we heard the Prime Minister said that he was planning for his potential peacekeeping initiative is now moving into an operational phase. Is the Foreign Secretary able to explain what moving into an operational phase means in practice, especially for armed forces? What planning is underway? What will our contribution to peacekeeping consist of? Over what timeframe would deployment be launched? And how will our armed forces be supported? Can he inform the House which allies in this coalition of the willing have expressed interest? What will they offer? And what discussions are underway with the US on deterrence and security guarantees to ensure that an invasion like this can never, ever happen again? Turning to the Middle East, Mr. Speaker, we are absolutely united on the position that Iran-backed terrorist Hamas can have no role in Gaza's future. But what has the government done to pursue an end to this brutal regime? And what discussion has he held with Middle Eastern counterparts on their proposed plan for the future of Gaza? Now is the time for maximum pressure on Hamas from the international community. They must release every single hostage. Is the UK directly involved in discussions to drive action in a positive direction? On Syria, Mr. Speaker, was there discussion about the ongoing status of HTS as a proscribed terrorist group? Following the government's lifting of 24 sanctions on entities linked to the deposed Assad regime, does the recent violence change the government's assessment of the merits of lifting these kinds of sanctions? Mr. Speaker, we understand from the BBC that the UK did not directly participate in the US airstrikes on the Houthi targets at the weekend, but that our armed forces provided routine refuelling support to the US. Can the Foreign Secretary share with the House what the precise nature of the UK support was? In particular, given that the UK conducted multiple joint airstrikes with the US last year against Houthi militant targets to degrade their ability to threaten freedom of navigation. So can the Foreign Secretary explain why on this occasion it was decided that we would not deploy our own strike capabilities? And does he assess that there has been an increase in threat to the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and to British vessels and personnel? If so, what is the government's overall approach to this threat and to the Houthis? Are hard power options still on the table as they were last year? Will the government ramp up sanctions and pressure on the Houthis and, importantly, on Iran, the malign force in the region that continues to back them? What steps is the government taking to interdict weapons flowing from Iran to the Houthis? And what discussions has the Foreign Secretary had with his American counterparts on the US approach to Iran more broadly? And where does the UK fit in this? Mr. Speaker, the G7 statement also made reference to the range of challenges posed by China. Our key partners are alert to the threat China poses, but this government seems to be oblivious to it. As China threatens global security, our national interests, and to put bounties on the heads of Hong Kongers living here, we've also seen the Energy Secretaries following the Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary kowtowing to the Chinese Communist Party, and the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary, who are responsible for national security, are now the cheerleaders for the Chinese Super Embassy planning application. So will the Foreign Secretary disclose in full all contacts and communications between his department, Downing Street, the Chinese Authority and MHCLG about this matter? Does he recognise the anxiety this planning application is causing to the groups who are threatened by China? Will he accept the threats and risks that mean China must join Iran on the enhanced tiers of furs? And finally, Mr. Speaker, on the Chagos surrenders deal, was this discussed with his US counterparts? Will he commit to present a draft treaty to the House before it is signed? And how can he justify handing over billions of pounds of British taxpayers' money to Mauritius instead of defending our sovereignty?
Well, I'm very grateful, Mr. Speaker, particularly for the cross-party nature of the Secretary of State for the opposition. Mr. Speaker, I'm a little jet lagged. I got off a plane at 6 o'clock, so you'll forgive me. But I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for the manner of her remarks, particularly on Ukraine. And there were a number of questions which I will seek to deal with. She's absolutely right that Zelensky has made absolutely clear that he is committed to peace. She asked me about the US decision on a military pause in aid and on intelligence aid. I'm pleased to say that our assessment is that that pause, as she will know, was for a short period, not an extended period, and therefore it has not had a material effect. But we were pleased to see that resume, and we were pleased to see what flowed from Jeddah, which was the United States, European allies, and President Zelensky in Ukraine absolutely square now with the need for that ceasefire, and it is for Putin to unconditionally now accept that ceasefire. The ball is in his court, and I was pleased to be able to discuss these matters with Secretary Rubio over the course of the 3 days at the G7, but also with Vice President Vance yesterday morning at his residence in Washington. She rightly asks about Russian assets. Let me make clear, Russia must pay for the damage it is causing Ukraine. I'm delighted that the first £752 million payment of the UK's £2.26 billion loan to be repaid by the profits has been generated on Russian-sanctioned assets so far, but she knows that there is rightfully a discussion about moving from freezing to seizing. It's important that if we were to move in that direction, that there is unanimity amongst the G7, of course, and that there is a way forward within the European Union for those countries that are most exposed, and as she would expect, at pace, we are discussing these very same issues. She also asks about UK troops on the ground. At stake is not only the future of Ukraine, but the collective security of our continent and therefore Britain's direct national interests. And that's why the Prime Minister has said that Europe needs to step up, and the UK is prepared, of course, to consider committing British troops on the ground, but there must be a US backstop. There is a further meeting in London this week to continue to get into the operational detail. The Prime Minister and I are pleased, alongside the Defence Secretary, that the coalition of the willing is growing. It is right that we consider carefully what would be required on the ground, but I know that she will know too that what is very important is the monitoring exercise of what is put in place. And she, like me, no doubt, will have seen the operation that was run by the OSCE. I saw that operation in January, just before the fighting began in February. That would not be adequate this time round, and so rightly and properly we must get into the granular detail of what would be required. Yes, of course, as a European family, but also involving nations like Canada, and I had a commitment from Minister Melanie Joly that Canada is willing to step up to be part of that coalition going forward, but there will be others in that coalition of the willing, and so we will look at these issues in detail over the coming days. She, of course, mentions the situation in Gaza and the Middle East. And let me be absolutely clear, we were all united. There can be no role for Hamas. We welcome the work that has been done by the Arab Quint as a direction of travel. The United Kingdom wants to continue to work with the Arab Quint on strengthening that proposal, particularly on the security guarantees that the Israelis would rightfully need, their assurance that October the 7th can never, ever happen again. She also raises the situation in Syria. The awful clashes during the weekend of the 8th and 9th of March led to the death of more than 1,000 people. And we condemn the violence at the time, and the Minister for the Middle East updated the House on the 10th of March. It is critical that the interim administration in Syria respects and protects all of Syria's minorities, and that is why it was heartening to see the agreement last week between the interim administration and the Syrian Democratic Forces, particularly in north-east Syria, and this was obviously a topic of much discussion. She rightly also mentions the strikes in the US. Now, since the 19th of November 2023, the Houthis have targeted international commercial shipping in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden and attacked British and American warship. This cannot go unchecked. It is totally unacceptable, and it must be dealt with. We don't comment, of course, on other nations' military operations, but I can confirm that we did not take part in the strikes over the weekend, but we are in close touch with our US friends and on the need to act with the Houthis and what they are doing in the Red Sea. She talks about the government's approach to China. What I can assure her is from this government, there will not be 7 different approaches to China, which is what we experienced under the last government. Ping-ponging about over the course of those 14 years, and that calamity of a United Kingdom Prime Minister having a beer with the leader of the Chinese Communist Party. I guarantee her that will not happen under this government. And quite properly, I and the Home Secretary made representations, as she knows, to the planning process about the security issues that must be kept in mind as the proper procedures are followed for China's application. And she knows too that we also have our concerns about our embassy in China and its proper operation. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm so pleased to see the Foreign Secretary this weekend continuing to lead our allies in support of Ukraine, and equally pleased to see that he has expressed his support for the issue of moving from freezing to seizing Russian assets. We do have 18 billion of them held in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to say, though, if we're serious about doing this, then I wondered if we could start getting on with it. So the question I have is, what moves is his department making for example, putting legislation on the books which would allow us to seize those assets when the right time comes? I'm glad to hear that there are discussions to put, but I wondered whether there have been pressure put on our G7 and EU allies who still sit on the remaining £300 billion of assets that also perhaps need to be seized at this stage. And has he considered a UN General Assembly resolution providing the legal basis for coordinated asset seizures?
Well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Lady for her question and, of course, her leadership of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Can I reassure her that we continue to work closely with our allies on this issue, including discussions, lengthy discussions that we had at the G7, Madam Deputy Speaker. But let me also emphasise it is important in this particular area that any way forward is a pooling of that exercise, I don't believe that it would be right for the UK in this instance to act unilaterally, and therefore this is a multilateral endeavour and discussion. She's right, and I get the emphasis of her question, that we should work at pace on this, and can I reassure her that we are?
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also thank the Foreign Secretary for advance sight of his statement. Like him, I will focus on Ukraine. Last week, President Zelensky announced his willingness to accept an immediate ceasefire. In response, Vladimir Putin intensified his attacks on Ukraine. This gives the lie to Putin's cheap talk about agreeing with the idea of a ceasefire. His goals remain the same: destroying Ukraine's sovereignty and turning it into a satellite state of Russia. The only way to strengthen and achieve a just and lasting peace is by strengthening Ukraine in the face of Putin's brutality. So I was slightly alarmed to hear the Foreign Secretary say that we can only seize Russian assets if we progress by unanimity. If the US refuses to seize Russian assets, will the Foreign Secretary take a lead with European partners so this support can flow? And can he also say what is stopping him from unlocking the £2.5 billion generated from the sale of Chelsea Football Club, held here in the UK, that should already have provided humanitarian aid to Ukraine? The Foreign Secretary referred to the work that ministers have been doing to build a coalition of the willing to support any final peace agreement in Ukraine, which my party strongly supports. But I do ask the Foreign Secretary if he can be more specific. What levels of support have other countries committed? And what progress has he made in securing a backstop security guarantee from the United States? Liberal Democrats have warned repeatedly that Donald Trump's actions are emboldening Putin. Last month, Trump said Russia should rejoin the G7 if a peace settlement is agreed. This would be unjust and wrong. Did the Foreign Secretary make clear to his G7 counterparts that the UK would oppose Russia rejoining the G7? And given that Donald Trump is not a reliable ally, Liberal Democrats have argued that the UK must lead in Europe to reduce the continent's reliance on the United States. We support a pan-European rearmament bank so Europe's defences can be rapidly rebuilt. Yet last week we saw proposals from the European Commission for EU structures that could leave the UK out. So will the Foreign Secretary use his meeting with High Representative Callas tomorrow to make sure that the UK plays a full part in European efforts to the benefit of our security and our defence industry?
Yes. Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for continuing that cross-party unity. He's usually pretty on top of the details. Can I just say to him, on the sovereign assets issue, it is not the United States that has raised consistent concerns about sovereign assets. It's not the United States in this instance that's more exposed than others. It's actually within Europe, Belgian colleagues that have found themselves more exposed, and German colleagues that have previously been resistant to this issue. But of course there's a change, an administration in Germany coming, and so we'll see what their assessment is. On the issue of those funds from Abramovich that of course we want to use, can I just say, and I should have said this to the Right Honourable Lady, we inherited this from the last government. 2.5 years, no progress was made. I am frustrated with that lack of progress, and I am doing everything I can in order to reach a resolution in this matter. And if not, of course, I've got to consider all the tools that are available to government. But at this stage, what I want is to be able to act quickly, given that he knows and I know and we all know that Ukraine need those funds now. And therefore, we urge, working with other colleagues and Mr. Abramovich's lawyers, we urge action now. Can I say to him, there was no discussion of Russia joining the G7. I mean, no discussion whatsoever. The G7 is a family of democratic nations committed to the rule of law. Russia under Putin has put themselves way outside of that club and that necessary partnership. I see no basis at the moment on which Russia could enter the G7, and indeed there would be other candidates way ahead of Russia were that to be the place. Now, I'm delighted that the Lib Dems have a proposal for a rearmament bank. I would just say to them that Ursula von der Leyen got there before them.
To ensure all colleagues can get in, questions will have to be short, and if answers continue to be long, there'll be some disappointed backbenchers. Ruba Huck.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome my right honourable friend's strong statement that blockading all aid into Gaza, including UK-raised aid, is appalling and unacceptable. So what discussions did he have with G7 colleagues about what can be done about this provocative action during Ramadan? And what consequences are there for what people are saying is a breach of international law?
Well, my honourable friend is right. This is a breach of international law. Israel, quite rightly, must defend its own security. But we find the lack of aid, it's now been 15 days since aid got into Gaza, unacceptable, hugely alarming and very worrying. And we would urge Israel to get back to the amount of trucks that we were seeing going in, way beyond 600, so that Palestinians can get the necessary humanitarian support they need at this time.
Mark Pritchard.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement today and for all his hard work travelling all around the world trying to make us all safer. He mentions the OSCE. And whilst the previous model may not be fit in Ukraine for the future, I hope you recognise the important role of the OSCE will play in future elections in Ukraine, and certainly some new model perhaps alongside a security force. But may I just bring his attention to the joint statement from Canada, where it says the highlights, quote, Iran is the principal source of regional instability, and, quote, some would argue, of course, global instability and insecurity. And in his statement today, he says, quote, Tehran is producing highly enriched uranium at a rate that makes a mockery of the limits set in the JCPOA. So can I ask the Foreign Secretary, if Israel, with or without US support, takes direct action to make the world a safer place and to stop Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon, will the UK government support that action?
Well, I'm very grateful for the honourable gentleman raising this issue of Iran and their desire to have nuclear capability. We stand in the way of that, and working with the Germans and the French, we are determined to use all diplomatic efforts to bring about a conclusion to that desire. And I discussed that, of course, with Secretary of State Rubio alongside my French and German counterparts at the G7. But we also discussed maximum pressure, and we also discussed that nothing is off the table as we discuss these issues with Iran, and we are running out of time to reach a resolution to this issue.
Blair McDougall.
Deputy Speaker, can I welcome the Foreign Secretary's uncompromising message to Vladimir Putin, and I wonder if he would add to that with a clear message that there can be no peace while the tens of thousands of Ukrainian children who've been stolen from their parents and scattered around Russia are not returned. And I wonder if he shares my concern at reports that the humanitarian research lab at Yale University has been defunded by Elon Musk while they were tracking hundreds of those abducted children. And will he work with international allies to make sure that that data is not lost and ensure that it contributes to getting those children back to their anguished families?
Well, can I congratulate my honourable friend for his question, for the horrors of what the Russian regime has done to those children, for the manner in which, and he will be pleased, and the whole House will be pleased, that we have, through our ODA budget, supported efforts to retrieve and work alongside those children. I was so pleased to spend time with some of those children on my last visit to Ukraine with Madam Zelensky, but also on the previous visit with the work that is going on. And we keep this issue absolutely in our sight. It cannot be a negotiating tool in any future discussions that we have with Mr. Putin.
Sir Gavin Williamson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if I can draw attention to my register of interest, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs rightly set out a broad range of challenges that were discussed there very well and very detailed, but one area he touched on was the threat of the Houthis, and of course they're being supported by Al-Shabaab in Somalia, and of course you have the Republic of Somaliland, which is the only democratic country in the area that's valiantly trying to fight these terrorist threats. Will the Secretary of State commit to his department to working with the government of the Republic of Somaliland to deal with those threats that they're facing, but we're also facing?
Well, can I reassure the honourable gentleman that this was also raised in discussion with G7 colleagues. He's absolutely right. Al-Shabaab is a deep, deep concern, and the terrorism that emanates from their activities is something that we closely monitor and work with partners on. And yes, of course, I can give him that assurance.
Happy St Patrick's Day to you, and happy birthday to my dad, who no doubt's watching. He likes to keep an eye on me, Madam Deputy Speaker. A lot of time for the TV. The Secretary of State will know that there are a number of Sudanese British people in Newcastle. I've raised some of their cases with him to date. They remain devastated by what they see and what their family members are going through on television and in the media, and so I thank him and his team for the support that they've given me and my constituents so far. But in advance of the conference to which he's just referred, can I urge him to engage the AU, the Commonwealth and the Arab League to make sure that the political process to which he referred in his statement is fit for purpose?
Well, can I wish my honourable friends, Father, all good wishes too on his birthday, and thank him for the way he has continued to raise these issues of conflict in Africa in the chamber. He will be pleased that I met with the African Union at the G20 a few weeks ago. We will work with them for the conference on April the 15th. We expect them to attend alongside other African nations. It's hugely important that we make some breakthrough, not just on the humanitarian side, but on the political side, to bring this conflict to an end.
Deputy Speaker, the Foreign Secretary is clearly a busy man, and I understand why we haven't seen him since the Prime Minister announced a 40% cut to the overseas development budget on February the 25th. So can I ask him now, were the consequences of slashing overseas aid discussed at the G7, and how did he explain to them that withdrawing life-saving aid to the poorest people on the planet, thereby making them even more dependent on Russia and China, would in the long run make us all safer and more secure?
Well, can I just say to the honourable gentleman that occasionally he's wrong. And very occasionally, Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister made a statement about defence spending. It was a statement that was applauded right across the European families and certainly in the United States, and it was essential. The following week, the Prime Minister came back and made another statement about leading efforts within Europe, and I was sat right next to him. So I'm just going to say to the honourable gentleman needs to get his eyes tested, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I was going on the issue of development aid, which is an important issue. We have not made an ideological decision. We do not want cliff edges, and it's important that the honourable member knows that when one looks at foreign policy, diplomatic efforts, development efforts, and of course hard power, this is a family of tools, he should never forget that the war in Ukraine has cost the African continent $7 billion. And that's right. It's right that we defend in our defences, but it's also right that we continue to spend aid in Ukraine.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think my constituency neighbour was reading my notes earlier by raising the issue that he did, but I'll raise it again because I don't believe we can say enough about the 19,546 stolen children from Ukraine, and the Humanitarian Research Lab at Yale University, who have just had their funding cut by the United States, were not only trying to reunite those children with their families, they were also documenting some of the war crimes that are currently taking place. So can my right honourable friend say a little more about how we're going to ensure that work is not lost, and also can he say what we're doing to support families who will be reunited with children who will be so severely traumatised?
Yeah.
Secretary.
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. Can I just reassure her that the UK does continue to track Russia's deportation of Ukrainian children, which is a clear violation of international law. I met with Madam Zelensky in Kyiv back in February on this issue. The UK was very pleased to see another group of children returned via Qatari mediation in September 2024. We're consistently raising awareness of child deportations in our comms and across multilateral forum like the OSCE, and of course in ensuring that in any changes we make to development spend, that we are making sure that our commitments to humanitarian efforts are made to Ukraine. This is an area where she could expect to see the UK continue to fund support.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. It's good to hear that the G7 believes that Iran should not be allowed to build a nuclear bomb. It's a statement of the obvious. It's also good to hear that President Trump has sent a strongly worded letter to the Supreme Leader. But does the Foreign Secretary agree with me that the JCPOA was dead in the water the minute President Trump pulled out in 2018? And he talks of what we might now do and that nothing is off the table. Would he confirm that that includes military action?
Secretary.
Well, I must let Mr. Trump speak for himself when he says that nothing is off the table in dealing with Iran. But I am pleased that in working alongside the US, they recognise the important role that we, the French and German play. They recognise that maximum pressure is essential. And we have made clear to the Iranians that that step back and the sanctions that would follow, squeezing the Iranian economy at a time when everyone accepts that Iran is weak, is not what they want to see. So they need to get serious about their nuclear ambitions, and we will work on all tracks. And of course, he will have read, just like I have, that military endeavour is absolutely an option that certainly our Israeli colleagues remind us about on a pretty regular basis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I draw the House's attention to my entry in the Register of Members' Financial Interests and welcome the Foreign Secretary's statement today, and also thank him for his leadership he's shown over the last few weeks, in particular on Ukraine. The Foreign Secretary mentioned discussions he has had with his Canadian counterpart. Following the G7 meeting he attended, is he able to share what further progress he has made in building the much-needed coalition of the willing in order to guarantee Ukraine's security?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. A number of nations are stepping up and coming forward, of course, alongside the United Kingdom and France, and Canada is absolutely one of them. I don't want to give a running commentary because there are further meetings this week, and I think it is right that when we're talking about committing troops particularly, that he will understand that different countries have different requirements in terms of going to their own parliaments, the way that they speak to their own nations about these matters. And so it's right that I leave them to do that and don't make announcements from the dispatch box.
Alison Bennett.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 25th of February, the Foreign Secretary told me in this chamber that he was minded to move, and I quote, from freezing to seizing Russian assets. And I note that he's used that phrase again this afternoon. Given the increasingly mercurial nature of our American allies in their support of Ukraine, what progress has been made, and what is the Foreign Secretary's best estimate of when our Ukrainian friends will be able to benefit from those frozen assets?
Secretary.
Well, I understand why the Honourable Lady raises the question as it does, but as I said to the Liberal Democrat spokesman, this is not an issue where the US is the blocker. It's an issue where there are nations within Europe that are more exposed than others. And it is best, as I said to the chair of the Select Committee, that we act multilaterally, and that is the issue. But we're working at pace.
Fred Thomas.
For the Foreign Secretary in Canada representing our country, and a big weekend for the Royal Navy in Plymouth. And the Foreign Secretary alluded to increased cooperation with our EU, NATO allies in terms of defence activity. In Plymouth this weekend, the Deputy French Ambassador was down to unveil Ariadne. This is a new capability that the French and British navies now hold, unmanned, uncrewed, completely autonomous, end-to-end, 12-metre long, underwater, mine countermeasure vessels, a remarkable feat of technology. And will he join me in celebrating this feat of cooperation?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say first to my honourable friend, thank him for his service. He will be pleased that maritime security was such a big discussion point at the G7, and I thank Canada for that. We are a great maritime nation, working with our colleagues, and can I assure him there will be more on this issue in the SDR, which is to follow.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement. It seems to me that Putin views the failure to seize the frozen assets as a sign of Western weakness. And if there are some reluctant countries in this, given that the Prime Minister is rightly leading a coalition of the willing, could the Prime Minister and the government lead a coalition of the willing of those nations who will seize those frozen assets?
Well, can I say that it's right and proper, as right across Europe we see a cost of living crisis, that we pool our efforts, but also that respective Treasury departments and finance ministers are satisfied that this would not have a detrimental effect on the global economy. Those are the necessary discussions that are being had. He knows my emphasis, but can I assure him that Europe is more united on these issues than we're currently seeing from reform?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'd also like to thank the Foreign Secretary for his statement to the House today. Last week, I hosted a Westminster Hall debate on the International Fund for Israeli-Palestinian Peace. And I wonder if the Foreign Secretary could advise the House if he was able to raise the matter at the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting, and if he might commit to a further meeting with MPs to discuss the UK's commitment to that fund.
Well, we were able to discuss Gaza and link that discussion to a broader discussion on development spend and our commitment to Gaza. He will know particularly that the United Kingdom supports the Palestinian Authority and the necessary reforms that they need to make. And can I assure him that I, or indeed the Minister for the Middle East, will meet and discuss these issues further?
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In his statement, the Foreign Secretary describes the blocking of aid to Gaza as appalling and unacceptable. Why doesn't he also confirm it's illegal, it's in breach of international law, and the continued bombardment of Gaza is likewise, as is the bombardment of the West Bank? When is the British government going to finally say to Israel, we will no longer supply weapons to you, we will no longer continue security cooperation while you continue to illegally occupy territory and commit international war crimes in both Gaza and the West Bank?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, can I say to the right honourable gentleman that I did say in my contribution that it is in breach of international humanitarian law, and of course we have spoken to the Israelis about those concerns, and indeed he will recall the decision that I made back in September of last year to suspend arms, and it was largely because of that breach.
John Slinger.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Earlier today in Parliament, I chaired an event to remember the victims of the appalling chemical weapons attack at Halabja on the 16th of March 1988, carried out by the vicious Saddam Hussein regime. They thank the UK for our help and friendship over the years. So does my right honourable friend agree that this and current crises show the need for a strong UK? And what I mean by a strong UK is strong armed forces, strong diplomacy with our superb diplomats, soft power with the World Service and the British Council, our alliances in Africa, in the Gulf and in Europe, and that these are vital to preserve and protect the international rules-based system that we all rely on.
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the honourable gentleman put his remarks incredibly well. Can I associate myself with the remarks he made about that appalling atrocity and absolutely say crystal clear that the United Kingdom, as a P5 member, it's hugely important that we continue to support our armed services and hard power, but also our soft power, our diplomatic efforts and our development spend. We will still be the 6th biggest development spender in the world. Is hugely, hugely important.
Richard Ford.
Madam Deputy Speaker, last spring, the UK joined the United States in conducting 5 combined joint naval and airstrikes against the Houthis. This weekend, the US conducted airstrikes without participation from the RAF, except in terms of routine refuelling support. Why the change? What does it signal about British foreign policy? And does he consider that getting US involvement in a backstop in Ukraine is more challenging when the US has to operate alone against the Houthis?
Foreign Secretary.
Well, the United Kingdom was involved to the extent of supporting US efforts on refuelling. I don't think that it would be right for me to comment on the detail of any military exercise, but can I reassure him that we continue to work very closely with our friends in the United States, and as he would expect, I was briefed on these issues alongside the Prime Minister and others.
Final question, Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank very much the Secretary of State for his statement and his very strong words. They're much appreciated. I very much welcome the reaffirmation of support for Ukraine contained within the statement, as well as a continuation of support for a peaceful resolution in Israel and Gaza. However, peace cannot come at the appeasement of Russia or the Hamas terrorist murderers that they are. So how will the Secretary of State ensure that peace will have at its foundation respect rather than threat? And what more can be done in the interim to ensure that children from both sides in Israel and Gaza border and in Ukraine can have the food, the medicine, the clothing and the education while these complex needs are sorted out? Thank you so much.
Secretary.
Well, I'm sure the whole House is hugely grateful for the humanity that the honourable gentleman has shown once again on the issue of children on both sides of this conflict. I think it's horrendous that when one looks at the scenes of those hostages coming out, that amongst those hooded young men with Kalashnikovs were children. This cannot be right or proper. But at the same time, it cannot be right to starve children of the humanitarian aid, the medical supplies that they need at this time, whilst we seek to deal with the problems of Hamas and get those hostages out. I always in my remarks hold up the prospect of a two-state solution as a way through this most complex and difficult of challenges. And I'm very grateful for the way in which the honourable gentleman has raised his remarks in the House today.
That concludes the G7 statement. I'll give the front benches a few moments to swap over. programme motion. Minister to move. No debate? No debate? She's back to move. So the question is the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill. Motion as on the order paper. I'm going to move straight on to the vote sending. Yes? Yep. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read orders of the day.
Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill, as amended in the Public Bill Committee, to be considered.
Now. We will begin with new clause 18, with which it will be convenient to consider other new clauses, amendments and new schedules as listed on the selection paper for day 1. I call the Minister to move new clause 18. Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and may I start by thanking all right honourable members from across the House for their valuable contributions throughout the passage of the bill to date. In particular, members of the Public Bill Committee for providing substantial debate and scrutiny. The Children's Wellbeing Bill is a landmark bill and a key piece of legislation which will enable us to deliver the government's opportunity mission, our determination to break the link between young people's background and their future success. It will protect children at risk of abuse. It will stop vulnerable children falling through the cracks in services, and it will deliver a core guarantee of high standards with space for innovation in every child's education. And it will put in place a package of support to drive high and rising standards throughout education, throughout children's social care, so that every child can achieve and thrive. Now, reforming children's social care is critical to giving hundreds of thousands of children and young people the start in life that they deserve. And our approach to reform will break down barriers by shifting the focus of the children's social care system to early support to keep families together. We will ensure children can remain with their families where appropriate, support more children to live with kinship carers or in fostering families, and fix the broken care market to tackle profiteering and put children's needs first. Madam Deputy Speaker, the previous government bequeathed to us a bitter inheritance, not only child poverty affecting across great swathes of our country, 1 in 3 or even 1 in 2 of our young people, not just record numbers of children out of school or not turning up for school, not merely a children's social care system at breaking point. No, bitterest of all, they left a fiscal black hole which must be tackled to get this country's finances and future back on track, but which limits the speed which we can deliver on the ambition we have, which all members on this side of the House have for a brighter future for Britain's children. Madam Deputy Speaker, I will now turn to speak to our government amendments. New Clause 18 to New Clause 22 introduce corporate parenting duties on government departments and relevant public bodies. Now, a previous Labour Prime Minister observed, following Tawney, that what a wise parent would wish for their children, so the state must wish for all its children. And that is a principle which lies behind the change this amendment seeks to bring today, as we ensure that across the public sector we recognise the moral and necessary obligation to do all we can to level the playing field for children in care and for care leavers. Now, this group of young people face significant disadvantages. 26% of the homeless population is care experienced. Around a quarter of the adult prison population have been in care as a child, and care leavers aged 19 to 21 are over 3 times more likely to not be in education, employment or training than their peers. New Clause 18 introduces corporate parenting responsibilities for departments and the relevant public bodies, referred to as relevant authorities, listed in new Schedule 1. Now, new corporate parents will need to be alert to the needs of children in care and care leavers and assess the services or support that they provide which are available to them. They will also need to seek to provide them with the opportunities to participate in activities designed to promote their well-being or enhance their employment prospects. I will give way.
Minister, I very much welcome what you're saying in your reply and statement there. Last week, some of us had an opportunity to visit an event last Wednesday. It was Jamie Oliver was the person who was there. He's dyslexic. He put forward the issue that I think we need to recognise is that those with dyslexic and autism and challenging education behaviours also need to be helped. So can I ask the Minister very quickly, is that some of the sections of the population that also need help will receive help, please? Thank you.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention. I know he's a tireless champion for children and young people and regularly writes to me, even though education is a devolved matter. I will come on to saying a bit more later around the support available for children with SEND. He will know that this is at crisis point and this government is absolutely committed to reforming the system and working at pace in order to do so. Madam Deputy Speaker, new clause 20 introduces a duty on new corporate parents and local authorities in England to work collaboratively with each other when it is in the best interests of children in care and care leavers when undertaking these duties. Now, this is to avoid silo working or duplication of efforts, addressing the challenges that children in care and care leavers face holistically in the same way that parents do when supporting their children. New Clause 21 introduces a duty on relevant authorities to have regard to guidance issued by the Secretary of State. And the guidance will set out how the duty relates to different corporate parents and how this will continue to contribute to outcomes we seek for children in care and care leavers. We will develop this guidance in partnership with the sector and with the relevant authorities listed in new Schedule 1. New Clause 22 introduces a duty on the Secretary of State to report on their corporate parenting activity every 3 years, bringing accountability to the new duty and allowing us to monitor progress and the impact of implementation. New Schedule 1 also provides a power for the Secretary of State to amend the list of corporate parents by affirmative regulations. Now, the purpose here is clear that where children in care and care leavers can be further supported by the addition of new public duties as corporate parents, or where we need to make changes to existing ones, they need not wait for fresh primary legislation, and we shall have the power to act swiftly and powerfully in their interest so that we have the means to do so this swiftly. I'm sure that the Right Honourable and Honourable members across this House share this government's ambition to drive a step change in the experiences and outcomes of some of the most vulnerable children and young people in society, and will support these new clauses. I will give way.
I thank the Minister for giving way on that point, and I thank him for his speech. Although not explicitly mentioned in this document, young carers are obviously a group of young people that are potentially vulnerable. And having spoken to the DfE, I know there are parts of the bill that will support young carers better. I wonder if he could touch upon that.
Minister.
Yeah, I thank my honourable friend for that intervention and absolutely supporting young carers as a key priority for this government. I know that he's a real champion on these issues and very happy to work with him to make sure their views are heard in this place. And I thank him again for his intervention. Madam Deputy Speaker, the government is also tabling amendments in relation to the bill's information sharing and consistent identifier duties clause 4. The wider picture here is that too often children are failed by inadequate or patchy information sharing, and this is not good enough. The bill enables us to bring change children need, and the amendments ensure that we get that right from the outset. These amendments will ensure that where those in scope engage others to provide services related to safeguarding or promoting the welfare of children, such as primary care providers, the duties will also extend to the providers of those services. This is not intended to cover providers engaged by those in scope for other purposes, but which may incidentally engage with the relevant functions. For example, IT service providers or interpreters, and who do not independently hold information that is not already available to the agencies in scope. This will be clarified in statutory guidance. Now, the government has also tabled amendments to clauses 4, 13 and 18 to ensure that information sharing powers and duties in the bill contain standard provision where appropriate. These amendments are required to make clear that data protection legislation will and must be complied with to ensure that where appropriate restrictions on the sharing of data, such as a duty of confidence, do not prevent the sharing of data, and to ensure drafting consistency across the bill. Now, the government is also moving amendments that allows information to be shared between the Department for Education and the Care Quality Commission about a provider's financial risk. After 14 years of inaction, of failing outcomes and soaring costs, it is long past time for government to make the changes we seek to make through this bill to secure both higher capacity and more resilience among providers. And again, those are the changes we seek to bring through the bill, and the amendments we move today make sure we get those changes right. There are providers who operate both adult and children's social care services. Some of these are very large and therefore may be subject to both our new Children's Social Care Financial Oversight Scheme and the Care Quality Commission's Market Oversight Scheme, which has been operating for many years in the adult social care market. Now, these amendments allow information to be shared between the Department for Education and the Care Quality Commission about a provider's financial risk, particularly in advance of either oversight scheme issuing advance warning to local authorities. This will help the department inform an accurate, real-time assessment of financial risk. Now, there is another group of government amendments which we are moving today which apply the relevant clauses in this bill to Wales, following the Welsh Government having considered these and agreeing with their application. Members here, especially those representing Welsh constituencies, will know already the difference it makes to have a Labour government in London and Cardiff, which not only puts our children first, but work together constructively and at pace to deliver the change children in every part of the United Kingdom deserve. And I want to pay tribute to Lynn Neagle, MS, the Cabinet Secretary for Education in the Welsh Government, for her help in enabling to answer together that children in Wales, as well as England, will benefit from the new protections in the legislation. The first group of today's amendments in this area will extend the application of the ill treatment and willful neglect offence in the Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015 to children aged 16 and 17 in regulated establishments in Wales as well as England. There is currently a gap in the legal framework, meaning that it is not possible to prosecute individuals for low-level abuse of 16 to 70-year-olds in the regulated children's social care establishments or youth detention accommodation. The current offences in sections 20 and 21 of the Criminal Justice and Courts Act apply to both England and Wales, and this amendment seeks to maintain that application in relation to the amended offence. Secondly, an amendment will extend the application of the Deprivation of Liberty Order measure to Wales, and this will enable Welsh local authorities to seek authorisation to deprive children of liberty in relevant accommodation within England. Now, we recognise the importance of keeping children close to home within their safe and loving communities where this is possible and in the best interests of the child. However, in some circumstances where it keeps a child safe from harm, a cross-border placement is the right option. This amendment will ensure that where a cross-border placement which deprives liberty is in the best interest of the child can either be placed by Welsh local authorities in a secure children's home or as at present, or be deprived of their liberty in relevant accommodation in England which may better suit their needs. In both cases, the legislative consent motion process is engaged as this measure applies to Wales and falls within the legislative competence of the Senedd Cymru, and are working closely with the Welsh Government on this. We are continuing to have conversations with the Scottish Government on extending this measure to local authorities in Scotland. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, to conclude, the Children's Wellbeing and Schools Bill is a landmark piece of legislation through which we're delivering the biggest overhaul to children's social care in a generation. Our actions will transform children's lives, keeping children safe and ensuring opportunity and better life chances for all children. I'm grateful to all the Right Honourable and Honourable members who have made efforts to improve the bill and for their scrutiny and debate so far. I'd like to also extend my thanks to all those organisations and individuals who contributed to the development of the bill and submitted evidence, including witnesses at the bill's oral evidence session. We will continue to work closely with those organisations throughout the passage of the bill. I look forward to hearing further contributions and debate from members this afternoon on this bill as we continue to work across the House and beyond to break down the barriers to opportunity and give every child the best start in life.
New clause NC18, corporate parenting responsibilities.
The question is that new clause 18 be read a second time, and I call the Shadow Minister, Neil O'Brien.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to concentrate today on our new clause 36, banning phones from our schools. And this new clause would also write into law some of the content from the very good private members bill drafted by the Honourable Member for Whitehaven and Workington, because this doesn't need to be a party political issue. Now, when I was on the Science and Technology Committee back in 2018, I got us to do a report on screen time, social media, and children's mental health. And back then, the evidence was already very, very concerning. But by now, every alarm bell should be ringing. Because over the last decade, there's been an explosion in mental health problems among young people all over the world, over the exact same period that smartphones and social media have become dominant in children's lives. And the growth in mental health problems is focused almost entirely among young people, not older people. Children now get smartphones at a very early age. As the Education Select Committee pointed out in a good report last year, 1 in 5 of the UK's 3- and 4-year-olds now have their own smartphone. And by the end of primary school, 4 out of 5 kids have a smartphone. And there are many channels, many different ways through which smartphones and social media cause problems for children. They displace time in the real world with friends. US data, for example, shows that prior to 2012, children spent over 2 hours a day with friends. But by 2019, that halved. The proportion of children feeling lonely and isolated at school has exploded all over the developed world. But it's not just a time sink, there's also the lack of sleep. Children are tired in school. ADHD has increased massively. Concentration is impaired. And this is a feature, not a bug. Apps are designed to be addictive and drip feed you dopamine. At a recent school meeting I organised in my own constituency, I heard from local doctors about how excessive screen time is damaging eyesight and giving young kids the kind of back problems that you might expect from someone in late middle age. 8 out of 10 children are now exposed to violent porn before age 18, many at a really young age. The average age kids see porn at now is 13. The shift to a smartphone-based childhood is also leading children to be exposed to graphic violence, sextortion, self-harm encouragement, and doing terrible things to girls' self-image. According to the ONS, 1 in 5 children aged 10 to 15 say they've been bullied online, with 72% of that happening during school time. But as well as being bad in their own right, these different negative effects also come together to damage education. And while a ban of phones in schools can't fix everything, it's a vital first step, and it can make a big difference in itself. I spoke to one head teacher who said that when they went from a policy of phones not being out to a full start of the day to end of the day ban with phones handed in, the number of detentions that they had to hand out fell by 40%, and teacher recruitment and retention improved too. Yeah, I'm happy to give way.
I thank the Shadow Minister for giving way, and please take this as a constructive intervention. As a former teacher, I do know some of the challenges of mobile phones, and the Minister will remember my debate on financial education when hers went off. However, I would ask the Shadow Minister just to consider groups that may require a mobile phone. And I perhaps gave the Shadow Minister a hint as to what I was going to mention, in particular young carers who obviously do need that contact with family and those cared for.
The Honourable Member has brilliantly anticipated a point I was going to make, and if you look to the text of the amendment, you'll see he will see it's carefully drafted exactly to allow carve-outs for those who do need them, for example, as health devices. So I hope he is reassured on that point. Madam Deputy Speaker, attempts by the tech industry to lobby, to muddy the water, to run interference and to sow confusion are unconvincing. The problems hitting our children all over the world are not just a coincidence. There is more and more evidence for a causal link. For example, Sapien Labs asked questions about adults' mental health, combined them into a mental health quotient score. They asked the same people when they first got a smartphone, and the results were stark. The earlier you get a phone, the worse your mental health, particularly for girls. And as with smoking, there is a powerful social gradient also developing with smartphones and social media. And that is going to widen gaps in school achievement unless something really decisive is done. Though sadly, many people still don't know, unfortunately, about the risks from smartphones. A growing number of parents do know and are worried about the problems with smartphones and social media. But we face a collective action problem. We worry that our kids will miss out if they are the only ones without them. And that is the problem that needs solving, and government needs to be part of it. Across this country, there has been an explosion of parent-powered campaign groups aiming to fight back. Smartphone-free childhoods, safe screens, delay smartphones, the new Rage Against the Screen campaign. Over the last year, they have gained hundreds of thousands of members. And together with the Shadow Secretary of State and the Leader of the Opposition, we met with some of them this morning, and I pay tribute to their work. Would my honourable friend give way? I'm happy to give way.